In the moonlit shadows of a French golf course, a millionaire lies dead, a dagger in his back, buried in a grave dug with chilling precision. Who betrayed Paul Renaud? Was it his haunted wife, his estranged son, or the mysterious woman with mischief in her eyes? Hercule Poirot, the master of mysteries, steps into a web of blackmail, hidden identities, and a second corpse that defies explanation. Will his little grey cells unravel the truth before the killer strikes again? Murder on the Links, a nightmare where every clue is a trap and every secret could be fatal. Chapter 1. The urgent summons. The morning sun cast a golden glow through the lace curtains of Hercule Poirot's modest London flat, illuminating the orderly rows of books and the polished mahogany desk where the detective sat, his moustache impeccably trimmed, his hands folded neatly over a letter. The envelope, edged with a faint scent of lavender, bore a French postmark from Merlinville-sur-Mer, a coastal town known for its sandy beaches and sprawling golf course. The letter within, penned in a hurried, almost frantic hand, had arrived just hours ago, and its contents had set Poirot's mind ablaze with curiosity. Mon ami Poirot said, his voice a soft melody of Belgian precision. This is no ordinary summons. He held the letter aloft, his green eyes glinting with the spark of a new challenge. Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend and occasional chronicler, looked up from his newspaper, his face a mixture of intrigue and mild exasperation. Hastings had planned a quiet day, perhaps a stroll through Hyde Park, but Poirot's tone suggested that such plans were about to be appended. "What's it about, Poirot?" Hastings asked, folding the paper and leaning forward in his armchair. "Another damsel in distress? Or perhaps a stolen jewel?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile, but his expression remained serious. "It is far graver, Hastings. Listen." He adjusted his pince-nez and read aloud, his voice carrying the weight of the words, "Monsieur Poirot, I implore your assistance. I am in grave danger, the nature of which I dare not commit fully to paper. My life, and perhaps others, hangs in the balance. Come to Merlinville-sur-Mer at once. I will recompense you handsomely. Yours in desperation, Paul Renaud." Hastings frowned, his brow furrowing. Paul Renaud, the South American millionaire. "I read about him in the papers. Made his fortune in copper mines, didn't he?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, folding the letter with care. "A man of wealth, influence, and, it seems, secrets. He does not specify the danger, which is most curious. Why such vagueness? Why not go to the local police? This, Hastings, is a matter for the little grey cells." Hastings grinned, accustomed to Poirot's pride in his intellectual prowess. "Well then, what's the plan? Off to France, I suppose." "Indeed," Poirot said, rising with a brisk nod. "We take the next train to Calais. Pack your valise, mon ami. The game is afoot." The journey to France was a blur of clattering wheels and the rhythmic sway of the Calais Express. Hastings, ever the romantic, found himself distracted by a young woman seated across the carriage. She was striking, with auburn hair tucked beneath a cloached hat and eyes that sparkled with mischief. As the train rattled through the countryside, she caught Hastings' gaze and muttered, "Hell," under her breath, staring out at the passing fields. The exclamation, so unexpected from her delicate appearance, made Hastings chuckle, and he resolved to speak to her at the next opportunity. Poirot, meanwhile, sat with his hands steepled, his mind clearly elsewhere. "What do you make of this, Hastings?" he asked abruptly, tapping the letter against his knee. "A man of Renaud's stature does not write such a plea without cause. He fears betrayal, perhaps, or exposure, blackmail," Hastings suggested, tearing his eyes from the young woman. "Perhaps," Poirot mused, "or something more sinister. We shall see." The train pulled into Calais under a sky heavy with clouds, and a hired car whisked them to Merlinville-sur-Mer, a charming town where the sea breeze mingled with the scent of pine and freshly cut grass from the nearby golf course. The Villa Genevieve Renaud's residence stood at the edge of the town, its whitewashed walls and red-tiled roof a picture of opulence. But as they approached, a somber air greeted them. A police officer stood at the gate, his face grim, and a small crowd of locals whispered behind their hands. "Monsieur Poirot?" the officer asked, stepping forward. "I am Commissaire Bex of the Merlinville police. I regret to inform you that your journey may have been in vain. Monsieur Renaud is dead." Hastings gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. "Dead? How?" "When this morning," Bex replied, his voice clipped. "Found on the golf course, stabbed in the back and buried in a shallow grave. Madame Renaud is distraught, as you might imagine." Poirot's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes narrowed. "Take us to the scene at once, Commissaire. Every moment is precious." The golf course, a sprawling expanse of manicured greens and sandy bunkers, was an incongruous setting for murder. The body had been removed, but the shallow grave remained, a raw wound in the earth near the seventh hole. Poirot knelt beside it, his gloved fingers tracing the disturbed soil. "Curious," he murmured. "The grave is shallow, yet dug with care. And the body, where was it positioned?" "Face down," Beck said, consulting his notebook. "A single stab wound to the back, clean and precise. The weapon, a dagger, was found nearby. It belongs to Madame Renaud." "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, his mind racing. "And Madame Renaud's account?" She claims two masked men broke into the villa last night, Bex said. They bound and gagged her, demanding money. She heard nothing of her husband's fate until we informed her this morning. Hastings, standing a few paces back, felt a chill despite the warm breeze. Masked men sounds like a robbery gone wrong. Poirot shook his head. Nan, Hastings. A robbery does not end with a body buried so neatly. This is a crime of calculation, of purpose. He stood, brushing dirt from his trousers, till commissaire, was anything unusual found on the body? Bex hesitated. An overcoat, too large for Renaud. It belongs to his son Jack, who is away in Paris, and a letter unsigned, but personal. Poirot's interest was piqued. May I see it? Bex handed over a folded sheet. Its edges crumpled. Poirot unfolded it with care, reading aloud in a low voice. My heart burns for you, but we must be cautious. Meet me at the usual place. He looked up, his eyes sharp. A love letter, perhaps, but to whom? And why was it in Renaud's possession? The commissaire shrugged, clearly overwhelmed. We are still investigating. Inspector Giraud from the Paris Street is arriving tomorrow. He's their best man for physical evidence. Poirot's mustache twitched with what might have been amusement. Physical evidence is but one piece of the puzzle. Commissaire, mind, the motive, these are what revealed the truth. As they returned to the villa, Hastings' thoughts drifted to the young woman from the train. She had disembarked at Merlinville, and he wondered if she was among the crowd now dispersing. Poirot, he ventured, do you think the letter could belong to someone in the household? A scandal, perhaps. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. But we must not leap to conclusions. Mon ami, we observe, we listen, we think. The villa's interior was as grand as its exterior, with marble floors and chandeliers that gleamed in the afternoon light. Madame Eloise Renaud, a pale woman with haunted eyes, received them in the drawing-room. Her hands trembled as she recounted the night's events, the masked intruders, her husband's absence, the terror of being bound. Poirot listened intently, his questions gentle but probing. You heard nothing of your husband's movements after the intruders left? He asked. Nothing, she whispered, her voice breaking. He was going to meet someone, I think. He was agitated all evening. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. And your son, Jack, when did you last see him? 2 days ago, she said. He went to Paris on business. He and Paul, they argued often, but Jack would never, of course. Poirot soothed, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. We will speak with him when he returns. As they left the villa, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the golf course. Hastings felt a pang of unease, the weight of the mystery settling over him. What now, Poirot? He asked. Now, Poirot said, pausing to survey the landscape, we begin. The letter, the overcoat, the grave old pieces of a puzzle. But fear not, Hastings, the little grey cells are already at work. They retired to a small inn nearby, where Poirot spent the evening in silence, his fingers steepled, his mind a whirlwind of deductions. Hastings, unable to sleep, replayed the day's events, his thoughts lingering on the mysterious woman from the train. Who was she, and what role, if any, did she play in this grim affair? As the clock struck midnight, Poirot spoke at last. Hastings, this case is like the golf course itself, deceptively simple, yet full of hazards. Tomorrow, we meet this Inspector Giraud, and then, mon ami, the game truly begins. The chapter drew to a close with Poirot's words hanging in the air, a promise of revelations to come. The murder of Paul Renaud was no mere crime of passion or greed, it was a carefully orchestrated act, and Poirot's resolve to uncover the truth burned brighter than the stars over Chapter 2. The Overcoat Enigma. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dew-soaked grass of the Merlinville-sur-Mer golf course, its emerald fairways marred by the grim discovery of Paul Renaud's body. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the shallow grave, his small polished shoes planted firmly in the earth, his eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. The air was crisp, tinged with the salt of the nearby channel, and a faint breeze stirred the tails of his immaculate coat. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings fidgeted, his gaze darting between the grim tableau and the cluster of French policemen milling about like bees around a disturbed hive. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice low but sharp, observe the scene. It is not merely a body we find, but a puzzle. And puzzles, Hastings, they speak to those who listen. Hastings nodded, though his thoughts were only half on Poirot's words. His mind kept drifting to the young woman from the train, the one with the bright eyes and the impulsive cry of hell at the window. She had vanished into the bustle of Calais station, leaving only a lingering impression of vivacity and a name he didn't know. He had dubbed her Cinderella in his mind, a romantic whimsy that Poirot would no doubt mock if he knew. Hastings cleared his throat, forcing his attention back to the present. It's a ghastly business, Poirot. Stabbed and buried like that. Who could have done it? Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of amusement or irritation. Hastings could never quite tell. Patience, Hastings. The who comes after the why and the how. First, we examine the facts. He gestured toward the grave, where Renaud's body lay, partially uncovered by the local gendarmes. The man's face, though pale and rigid in death, still bore traces of wealth and authority: high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a neatly trimmed beard. But it was the overcoat that drew Poirot's eye. It hung loosely on the corpse, its sleeves too short, its fit awkward, as if borrowed from a smaller man. "Curious, is it not?" Poirot murmured, stepping closer. "This coat, it does not belong to Monsieur Renaud. See how it pinches at the shoulders, how the cuffs ride up. Nan, this is not his." Hastings frowned, peering at the garment. Perhaps he grabbed it in a hurry. It was chilly last night. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A man of Renaud's wealth does not wear another's coat by mistake, mon ami. This is deliberate. A clue, perhaps, or a deception." The local police commissary, a stout man named Bex, approached, his face flushed with the importance of his role. "Monsieur Poirot, we have secured the area. The body was found by a groundskeeper at dawn, stabbed in the back, buried. The dagger is still in him, looks like a lady's weapon, ornate handle and all. We've sent for Inspector Giraud from the Paris Street. He's the best, you know." Poirot's lips curled slightly, a smile that conveyed more disdain than amusement. "Inspector Giraud? I have heard of him. A man who chases footprints and cigarette ash, no doubt. But we shall see who unravels this knot first." Bex blinked, unsure whether to take offense, but before he could respond, a young man in a sharply pressed suit strode onto the scene. Inspector Lucien Giraud was lean and angular, with a hawkish face and eyes that darted like a predator's. His movements were quick, almost theatrical, as he surveyed the grave. "So, this is the famous Hercule Poirot," he said, his tone carrying a hint of mockery. "I expected someone taller." Poirot inclined his head, unfazed. "And I, Monsieur Giraud, expected a detective who does not judge a mind by the height of its owner. Tell me, what do you make of this?" Giraud crouched beside the body, his fingers brushing the overcoat's fabric. "Sloppy work. The graves, barely a foot deep, amateurish footprints all around, but they're muddled. The dagger's a good lead. We'll trace it. And this coat," he paused, frowning. "It's not his size. Probably stolen from the house during the murder." "Stolen?" Poirot's voice was soft, but it cut through the air like a blade. "Or placed. Perhaps. Consider, Monsieur G. Why a murderer would dress his victim in the wrong coat. To confuse, to mislead, or to tell us something." Giraud snorted, standing. "You and your theories, Poirot. I deal in evidence, footprints, weapons, witnesses. Speaking of which, Madame Renaud's waiting at the villa. She says she was bound and gagged last night during a break-in. 2 men, she claims, South American types. Sounds like our culprits." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, merely gesturing for Hastings to follow as they made their way to the Villa Genevieve, Renaud's elegant seaside residence. The house was a study in opulence: white stucco walls, tall windows framed by ivy, and a manicured garden that spoke of wealth tended with care. Inside, Eloise Renaud sat in a velvet-upholstered chair, her face pale but composed. She was a striking woman, perhaps 40, with dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, and eyes that held a quiet strength despite her ordeal. "Madame," Poirot began, bowing slightly, "my deepest condolences. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We are here to find the truth. Will you recount the events of last night?" Eloise's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "It was just after midnight. Paul, my husband, was restless. He said he had business to attend to, but he wouldn't tell me what. I went to bed alone. Around 2, I was woken by a noise, footsteps, heavy ones. Before I could scream, 2 men burst into my room. They were masked, with accents, South American, I think. They tied my hands and gagged me, demanding to know where Paul kept his money. I told them I didn't know. They left and I heard nothing more until the maid found me this morning." Poirot listened intently, his head tilted like a bird studying its prey. "And your husband, madame, did he mention any enemies? Any threats?" Eloise hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window. "Paul was secretive. He said little about his business, even to me. But lately, he seemed worried. He received letters, urgent ones. He burned them after reading." "Letters," Poirot repeated, his voice almost a whisper. "And you did not see their contents?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But he was different after they arrived, distracted. He spoke of leaving Merlinville, perhaps for good." Hastings, standing by the fireplace, felt a pang of sympathy for the widow. Her composure was admirable, but the strain in her voice was unmistakable. He glanced at Poirot, expecting a question about the letters, but the detective's attention had shifted to a small table where a crumpled piece of paper lay. Poirot picked it up with gloved fingers, unfolding it carefully. It was a letter, written in a passionate looping script. "My heart, I cannot bear this any longer. We must be together, no matter the cost. Meet me tomorrow at the usual place. Yours forever." The letter was unsigned, and its envelope bore no address. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he tucked it into his pocket. "This was found on the body, I presume?" he asked Bex, who had followed them inside. "Yes," Bex confirmed. "In the overcoat pocket. Probably a woman's doing romantic nonsense like that usually is." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Nonsense, Monsieur Bex, or a key to the heart of this crime. We shall see." As they left the villa, Hastings couldn't shake the image of the letter. "Do you think it's a lover's note, Poirot? Someone Renaud was entangled with?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone noncommittal. "But whose lover, Hastings? And why place it in a coat that does not fit? These are the questions we must answer." Their next stop was the groundskeeper's shed, where the overcoat had been identified as belonging to Jack Renaud, Paul's son from a previous marriage. Jack, a lanky young man of 22, was absent, reportedly in Cherbourg on business. The groundskeeper, a grizzled man named Pierre, confirmed the coat was Jack's, kept in the villa's cloakroom. "Odd thing," Pierre muttered. "Master Jack's not been here in weeks. Why'd his coat end up on his father?" Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on his cane. "Why, indeed. Tell me, Pierre, did Monsieur Renaud have visitors recently? Anyone unusual?" Pierre scratched his chin. "There was that lady from next door, Madame d'Aubreuil. She came by often, her and her daughter. Always polite, mind you, but something about her eyes. Sharp, like she was counting the silver." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. As they walked back to the golf course, Hastings' thoughts wandered again to Cinderella. He hadn't seen her since the train, but Merlinville was small, surely their paths would cross. He was so lost in thought that he nearly collided with a figure rounding the corner of the clubhouse. It was her Cinderella in the flesh, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her eyes wide with surprise. "Oh," she exclaimed, steadying herself. "It's you, the man from the train." Hastings felt his face flush. "Ah yes, sorry about that, Captain Arthur Hastings, at your service." He hesitated, then added, "I don't believe I caught your name." She laughed, a sound like bells. "I didn't throw it, but since you ask, I'm Bella de Vallon, just passing through Merlinville. You know, bit of a lark." Before Hastings could respond, Poirot appeared at his side, his expression one of mild exasperation. "Mademoiselle, a pleasure, but we are in the midst of a serious matter. Perhaps you will excuse us." Bella's smile didn't waver. "Oh, don't mind me, I'm just here for the sea air." She winked at Hastings and sauntered off, leaving him staring after her. "Focus, Hastings," Poirot said sharply. "This Bella, she is charming, but charm can be a distraction. We have a murder to solve." Chapter 3. Shadows of Suspects. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured greens of the Merlinville-sur-Mer golf course, its serene beauty a stark contrast to the grim events that had unfolded. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the shallow grave where Paul Renaud's body had been found, his small, fastidious frame silhouetted against the dawn. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the scene with a precision that missed nothing. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his thoughts drifting to the vivacious young woman he'd met on the train. The one he'd impulsively nicknamed Cinderella after her spirited exclamation of hell. At the window, the memory brought a fleeting smile to his lips, but Poirot's voice snapped him back to the present. "Hastings, mon ami, you are daydreaming again," Poirot said, his tone a mix of reproach and amusement. "The heart, it is a fine thing, but the mind must take precedence in matters of murder. Observe the scene. Tell me what you see." Hastings cleared his throat, striving to match Poirot's focus. "Well, there's the grave, obviously freshly dug, as you said. The grass around it is disturbed, and there are footprints, some clear, some not. The police seem to think they're important." Poirot's mustache twitched. "The police, they are enamored with footprints, but footprints, Hastings, they tell only half the story. The mind of the criminal, that is where the truth lies. We must look beyond the obvious." They were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Giraud, the young and brash detective from the Paris street. His sharp features and confident stride exuded an air of self-assurance that bordered on arrogance. He carried a small notebook, scribbling furiously as he approached, barely acknowledging Poirot's presence. "Monsieur Poirot," Giraud said with a curt nod, "I trust you're not interfering with my crime scene. We've got enough to work with here without your theories." Poirot's eyes twinkled with a dangerous glint. "Interfere none, Inspector. I am merely observing. But tell me, have your footprints led you to the killer yet, or do they merely lead you in circles?" Giraud bristled but didn't rise to the bait. "We're making progress. The son, Jack Renaud, is our prime suspect. He stands to inherit a fortune, and we found evidence suggesting he was in Merlinville last night, despite his claims of being in Cherbourg." Hastings frowned. "Jack, but he's just a boy. Surely he wouldn't money." "Captain Hastings," Giraud interrupted, "makes monsters of us all, and the dagger used to kill Renaud, it belongs to his wife Eloise. That's no coincidence." Poirot raised a hand, his expression unreadable. "And what of Madame Renaud's account? She claimed she was bound and gagged by intruders. Does this fit your theory?" Inspector Giraud snorted. "Her story is convenient, isn't it? 2 masked men breaking in, tying her up, and leaving her unharmed while her husband is murdered. I'm not convinced." Poirot said nothing, his gaze drifting back to the grave. Hastings could almost hear the gears turning in his friend's mind, piecing together a puzzle that was still opaque to everyone else. Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of a police constable, who escorted them to the Villa Genevieve, the Renaud's elegant seaside home. The villa's whitewashed walls and sprawling gardens spoke of wealth, but an air of unease hung over the household. Inside, Eloise Renaud sat in the drawing-room, her delicate features pale and drawn. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a handkerchief, but her eyes were dry, her composure fragile yet intact. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising to greet them, "I am so grateful you've come. Paul spoke so highly of your abilities. He said if anyone could help us, it would be you." Poirot bowed slightly, his demeanor courteous but probing. "Madame, my deepest condolences. I assure you, I will leave no stone unturned. May I ask you to recount the events of last night? Every detail, no matter how small, may be significant." Eloise nodded, her voice steady but strained. "It was just after midnight. Paul had been restless all evening, pacing, muttering about some urgent matter. I went to bed, but I was woken by a noise, footsteps, I think. Before I could react, 2 men burst into the room. They were masked, dressed in dark clothes. One of them tied my hands and gagged me, while the other, I don't know what he did. I heard Paul cry out, and then silence. When I finally freed myself, he was gone." Hastings leaned forward, his voice gentle. "And you saw nothing of these men? No distinguishing features?" Eloise shook her head. "It was dark and they were quick. But I'm certain they were strangers. Their voices, they weren't French. One of them had an accent, South American perhaps." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, but he made no comment. Instead, he asked, "The dagger, madame, the one used to it, is yours, is it not?" Eloise's face crumpled. "Yes, it's mine. A gift from Paul years ago, when we lived in Santiago. It was kept in a case in our bedroom. I don't know how it ended up there." "Thank you, madame," Poirot said softly. "You have been most helpful. We will speak again soon." As they left the drawing-room, Hastings whispered, "Do you believe her, Poirot? Her story seems odd." Poirot tilted his head. "Odd, yes, but true. That is the question. There is something she was not telling us, Hastings, a secret perhaps that she guards, even in her grief." Their next stop was the home of Madame d'Albrul, the Renaud's charming neighbor. Her villa, smaller but no less elegant, was a short walk from the crime scene. Madame d'Albrul greeted them with a warm smile, her dark eyes sparkling with a mix of curiosity and caution. She was a striking woman, her auburn hair swept up in a stylish chignon, her movements graceful yet deliberate. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, gesturing to a pair of armchairs. "I was devastated to hear about poor Paul, such a tragedy. How can I assist you?" Poirot's smile was polite but guarded. "Madame, you were close to the Renaud's, Nan. You saw them often, perhaps knew their habits." "Oh yes," she replied, her voice smooth. "Paul and Eloise were dear friends. We dined together frequently, and my daughter Marthe is quite fond of Jack. It's such a pity he's been away so much lately." Hastings noted the warmth in her tone when she mentioned Jack, but Poirot's focus was elsewhere. "And last night, madame, did you hear or see anything unusual?" Madame d'Albrul hesitated, her fingers brushing the pearl necklace at her throat. "Nothing out of the ordinary. I was asleep by 10. The villa is quiet at night, you see." Poirot nodded, but his eyes lingered on her, as if searching for a crack in her polished facade. "Merci, madame, we will not take more of your time." As they stepped outside, Hastings couldn't resist commenting, "She's hiding something, isn't she?" "That pause, she wasn't telling the whole truth." Poirot chuckled softly. "You are learning, mon ami." "Yes, Madame d'Albrul knows more than she says. But what, and why? That is what we must discover." Back at their hotel, the Hotel Dauphin, Poirot and Hastings were joined by Giraud, who arrived with news that sent a jolt through the investigation. "We've arrested Jack Renaud," he announced, his tone triumphant. "He was seen in Merlinville last night, and we found his fingerprints on the dagger. The case is practically closed." Poirot's expression remained impassive. "The motive, Inspector? A son kills his father for money, you say?" "Exactly," Giraud replied. "Paul Renaud was worth a fortune. Jack's been living beyond his means, debts, gambling, the usual. With his father out of the way, he inherits everything." Hastings felt a pang of sympathy for the young man he'd barely met. "But surely there's more to it than that. What about the intruders Eloise mentioned?" Giraud waved a dismissive hand. "A fabrication, or at best, a misunderstanding. The evidence points to Jack." Poirot, however, was not convinced. "Tell me, Inspector, have you examined Monsieur Renaud's will?" "It is a recent document," Nan. Giraud frowned. "We're looking into it." "Why?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Because, my dear Inspector, I have learned that Paul Renaud changed his will just 2 weeks ago. Jack, it seems, was disinherited in favor of a charity in South America. If money was the motive, Jack had none." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Giraud's confidence faltered, but he recovered quickly. "That changes nothing. He might not have known about the new will, or he had other reasons, personal ones." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice soft but laced with steel, "but I suggest you look beyond the footprints, Inspector. The truth, it is not so simple." As Giraud stormed off, Hastings turned to Poirot, his mind racing. "Disinherited. That's a game changer, isn't it? If Jack didn't stand to gain, who did?" Poirot tapped his temple. That, Hastings, is the question. But there is another piece to this puzzle, one that takes us back in time. Have you ever heard of Georges Queneau? Hastings shook his head. No, should I have? Poirot's expression grew distant, his voice low. 22 years ago, a man named Georges Queneau was involved in a scandal that rocked France. A murder, a conspiracy, a disappearance. I believe our Monsieur Renaud may be connected to that case. And if I am right, the shadows of the past are casting a long net over murder. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Poirot and Hastings walked the quiet streets of Merlinville. Hastings' thoughts strayed to Cinderella, the mysterious woman from the train. He'd seen her earlier that day, strolling near the golf course, her auburn hair catching the light. She'd smiled at him, a fleeting, enigmatic gesture that left his heart racing. He wanted to tell Poirot to confess his growing fascination, but the detective's warning echoed in his mind. Focus on the case, Hastings, Poirot said suddenly, breaking the silence. You are distracted again. This Cinderella of yours, she is becoming a problem, Nan. Hastings flushed. I can't help wondering who she is. She's here in Merlinville, Poirot. I saw her today. What if she's involved somehow? Poirot stopped walking, his eyes narrowing. Involved, perhaps. But you must not let your heart cloud your judgment. If this young woman is part of our mystery, we will find her. For now we must focus on the suspects before us. Eloise with her dagger, Jack with his motive, Madame Dubreuil with her secrets, and the shadow of Georges Queneau looming over them all. They returned to the hotel where Poirot spent the evening poring over a small notebook, jotting down observations in his precise, elegant script. Hastings watched, marveling at the intensity of his friend's focus. The case was growing more complex by the hour, each new clue a thread in a tapestry of deceit. Who had killed Paul Renaud? Was it Jack, driven by a motive they hadn't yet uncovered, Eloise hiding a truth behind her grief, or Madame de Breuil, whose charm concealed a darker purpose? And what of the mysterious Cinderella? Could she truly be part of this deadly game? As the clock struck midnight, Poirot closed his notebook with a decisive snap. Tomorrow, Hastings, we dig deeper. The shadows of our suspects are long, but the truth, it is like the sun. It cannot stay hidden forever. Hastings nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Caught in the memory of a young woman's smile and the weight of a mystery that seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. The next morning, Poirot and Hastings returned to the Villa Genevieve, where Eloise awaited them in the drawing room. Her demeanor had shifted subtly. The fragility of the previous day was tempered by a quiet resolve. She greeted them with a nod, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Monsieur Poirot, she began, I've been thinking about what you asked yesterday. There's something I didn't mention, not because I meant to deceive, but because it seemed relevant. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes keen. Nothing is irrelevant. Madame, pray, tell me. Eloise took a deep breath. Paul was troubled in the weeks before his death. He received letters, not the one he sent you, but others, anonymous, threatening. He wouldn't show them to me, but he said they were from someone who knew about his past. He was afraid, Monsieur Poirot, more afraid than I'd ever seen him. Hastings' pulse quickened. Blackmail. Do you think someone was trying to extort him? Eloise hesitated. I don't know. He burned the letters, but he said something strange once. He said the past never stays buried. Eloise, not forever. Poirot's expression remained inscrutable, but his fingers drummed lightly on the arm of his chair, a rare sign of agitation. Thank you, madame. This is most illuminating. One more question. Did your husband ever mention a man named Georges Queneau? Eloise's eyes widened, just for a moment, before she shook her head. No, never. Who is he? Poirot smiled faintly. A ghost, perhaps, but one we must lay to rest. As they left the villa, Hastings couldn't contain his curiosity. Poirot, what's this about Georges Queneau? You keep mentioning him, but you haven't explained. Poirot glanced at him, his expression enigmatic. Patience, mon ami, all will be revealed in time. For now, let us say that Queneau is a name from a story of betrayal and murderer, a story that may have found its sequel here in Merlinville. Their next destination was a local police station, where Jack Renaud sat in a cramped cell, his face pale but defiant. He was a handsome young man, with his father's dark eyes and a stubborn set to his jaw. Giraud was present, overseeing the interrogation, but Poirot took the lead, his voice calm yet commanding. Monsieur Jack, he began, you claim you were in Cherbourg last night, yet witnesses place you in Merlinville. Which is the truth? Jack's eyes flashed. I was in Cherbourg. I took the evening train back this morning when I heard about father. I didn't kill him, Monsieur Poirot, I swear it. And the dagger, Poirot pressed. Your mother's dagger, found in your father's body. How do you explain that? Jack's shoulders slumped. I don't know. I haven't seen that dagger in years. Someone must have taken it from the house. Poirot studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. But tell me, what was your relationship with your father like? Were there disagreements? Jack hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. We argued, yes. He wanted me to take over his business, but I wanted to travel, to live my own life. He thought I was reckless, but I loved him, Monsieur Poirot. I would never hurt him. As they left the cell, Giraud smirked. He's lying. The boy's guilty as sin. Poirot raised an eyebrow. You are so certain, Inspector. Then perhaps you can explain why a man who stands to inherit nothing would kill for money. Giraud had no answer, and Poirot's smile widened ever so slightly. The afternoon brought them back to the golf course, where Poirot insisted on examining the crime scene once more. The shallow grave had been cordoned off, but Poirot knelt beside it, his gloved hands sifting through the earth. Hastings watched, puzzled, as Poirot retrieved a small, crumpled piece of paper from the soil, a fragment of a letter, its ink smudged, but legible. You cannot escape forever, Poirot read aloud. The truth will find you. Hastings gasped. Another threatening letter. But how did it end up here? Poirot tucked the fragment into his pocket. That, Hastings, is what we must discover. Someone wanted this message buried literally, but who and why? As they walked back to the hotel, Hastings' thoughts returned to Cinderella. He hadn't seen her since that morning, but her presence lingered in his mind, a distraction he couldn't shake. He resolved to find her, to learn her name, her story. But for now he followed Poirot, who was already planning his next move. That evening, over dinner at the Hotel du Fer, Poirot laid out his thoughts. We have 3 suspects: Hastings, Eloise Renaud, whose dagger was the murder weapon; Jack Renaud, whose motive is questionable but whose presence in Merlinville is not; and Madame Dubreuil, whose connection to the Renauds is deeper than she admits. And then there is this Georges Queneau, a name that ties this case to a crime long past. Hastings nodded, his mind racing to keep up. And the letter fragment, do you think it's connected to the blackmail Eloise mentioned? Almost certainly, Poirot replied. But we must tread carefully. The killer is watching, Hastings. They know we are close. As the night deepened, Hastings lay awake in his room, the events of the day swirling in his mind. The murder, the suspects, the mysterious letter, and, always, in the background, the image of Cinderella, her smile, both a comfort and a complication. He knew Poirot was right. He needed to focus, but something about her felt important, as if she held a piece of the puzzle he couldn't yet see. Meanwhile, Poirot sat at his desk, his notebook open, his pen moving swiftly across the page. The shadows of the suspects were indeed long, but he was determined to bring them into the light. And as he wrote, a single name circled in his mind: Georges Queneau. The key to a mystery that spanned decades and demanded all the power of his little gray cells to unravel. The next day dawned. With a sense of urgency, Poirot and Hastings returned to the Villa Genevieve, where they found Eloise in the garden, tending to a bed of roses. Her hands moved with practiced care, but her eyes were distant, lost in thought. Madame Poirot began, "We have found something, a fragment of a letter, buried with your husband. It speaks of the truth, finding him. Can you tell us anything more about these threats he received?" Eloise's hand stilled, her expression tightening. "I told you, he burned the letters. I didn't see them, but he did say something once. About a mistake he made long ago. He said it was coming back to haunt him." Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "And this mistake, did he say where it happened? Or when?" Eloise shook her head. "No, he was always vague about his past. He said it was better I didn't know." As they left the garden, Hastings whispered, "She's still holding something back, isn't she?" Poirot sighed. "Yes, mon ami. But fear can make even the innocent hide the truth. We must be patient." Their next stop was Madame Dubreuil's villa, where they found her daughter Marthe, a striking young woman with her mother's auburn hair and a quiet intensity. She greeted them politely, but with a wariness that mirrored her mother's. "Mademoiselle Poirot said you are close to Jack Renaud, are you not? Tell me, when did you last see him?" Martha's eyes flickered with unease. "A few days ago, before he left for Cherbourg. He was upset. He and his father had argued again." "About what?" Poirot asked, gently. Marthe hesitated. "Money, mostly. Jack wanted to start his own business, but Monsieur Renaud refused to help. He said Jack needed to learn responsibility." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "And last night, mademoiselle, where were you?" Martha's cheeks flushed. "I was here, with mother. We went to bed early." As they left, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that Marthe too was hiding something. "They're all so guarded," he said. "It's like everyone has a secret." Poirot smiled faintly. "In a murder case, Hastings, everyone does." That afternoon, they visited the police station again, where Giraud was reviewing the evidence against Jack. He showed them a photograph of the dagger, its ornate handle unmistakable. "It's open and shut," he insisted. "Jack's fingerprints, his presence in Merlinville, his motive, it all fits." Poirot shook his head. "And yet, Inspector, you ignore the disinheritance. And what of the overcoat found on the body?" "It belonged to Jack." "Yes, but it was too large for Monsieur Renaud. Why would a killer dress his victim in such a garment?" She shrugged to throw us off. "It's a clumsy attempt at misdirection," Poirot said. "It is a clue to something far more complex. Tell me, have you investigated Madame Dubreuil's background? Her connection to the Renauds is intimate." "No." Giraud's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Merely that the past has a way of catching up with us. You would do well to look into it." As they left the station, Hastings spotted a familiar figure across the street. Cinderella. She was walking with a purposeful stride, her auburn hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. Without thinking, he started toward her, but Poirot's hand on his arm stopped him. Hastings, focus, Poirot said sternly. She may be a distraction, or she may be a clue, but until we know which, you must keep your head. Hastings nodded reluctantly, but his eyes followed her until she disappeared around a corner. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than a chance encounter, that her presence in Merlinville was no coincidence. That evening, Poirot received a telegram from Paris, his contact at the Screet providing information on Georges Cunning. He read it in silence, his expression growing graver with each line. When he finally looked up, his eyes were alight with a new intensity. Hastings, he said, we are on the brink of something extraordinary. Georges Cunning was a man who vanished after a murder trial 22 years ago. A man accused of killing his lover's husband, only to disappear before justice could be served. And I believe none. I am certain that Paul Renaud knew him, perhaps too well. Hastings' jaw dropped. You think Renaud was involved in that old case? Poirot nodded. It is more than that. Mon ami, I think Paul Renaud was Georges Cunning. And if I am right, the motive for his murder lies not in Merlinville but in a secret buried for 2 decades. The revelation sent a chill through Hastings. The case, already complex, had taken on a new dimension. A past crime, a hidden identity, a web of lies. What did it all mean? And where did Cinderella fit into this tangled puzzle? As they retired for the night, Poirot's words echoed in Hastings' mind. The shadows of the past are casting a long net over Merlin. He knew sleep would not come easily, not with so many questions unanswered, so many secrets lurking in the shadows of their suspects. The next morning, Poirot was up early, his energy undimmed by the late hour they'd kept. He insisted on revisiting the golf course, where he paced the perimeter of the crime scene, his eyes scanning every blade of grass, every pebble. Hastings followed, trying to keep up with his friend's relentless focus. Look here, Hastings, Poirot said, pointing to a patch of earth near the grave. The soil is disturbed, but not as deeply as the grave itself. Someone stood here, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting, but who? Hastings squinted at the ground, seeing nothing but dirt. You're sure it's significant? Poirot's smile was patient. Everything is significant, mon ami. The smallest detail can unlock the greatest mystery. They spent the rest of the day interviewing minor witnesses, servants, groundskeepers, a caddy at the golf course, but none provided the breakthrough Poirot sought. Still, he remained undeterred, his confidence unshaken. That evening, as they sat in the hotel lounge, Hastings couldn't resist bringing up Cinderella again. Poirot, I know you think I'm being foolish, but I can't help feeling she's important. What if she's connected to the case? What if she saw something that night? Poirot sighed, but his expression softened. Very well, Hastings. Tell me about this Cinderella of yours. What does she look like? Where have you seen her? Hastings described her auburn hair, her lively eyes, the way she carried herself with a mix of confidence and mystery. He recounted their brief encounter on the train, her appearance near the golf course, and the smile she'd given him that morning. Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled. Interesting, very interesting. There is a young woman in who matches your description of Mademoiselle Bella Duvin, a stage performer staying at a nearby inn. She arrived the day before the murder. Perhaps your Cinderella is not so mysterious after all. Hastings' heart leaped. Bella Duvin, that's her name. Poirot nodded. But be cautious, Hastings. If she is involved, her role may not be innocent. We must find her and learn what she knows. The next day, they tracked down Bella Duvin at the Auberge des Roses, a quaint inn on the outskirts of Merlinville. She was sitting in the garden, reading a book, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. Hastings' breath caught as he approached, but Poirot took the lead. His demeanor all business, Mademoiselle Duvin, he said, bowing slightly. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is Captain Hastings. We are investigating the murder of Paul Renaud. May we speak with you? Bella's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her smile bright but guarded. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, I've heard about the tragedy. How can I help? Poirot's questions were gentle but pointed. You arrived in Merlinville recently, Nan. What brought you here? Bella hesitated. I'm a performer, you see. I was passing through looking for work. Merlinville seemed like a nice place to rest for a few days. And the night of the murder, Poirot pressed. Where were you? At the inn, she said quickly. I went to bed early. I didn't hear or see anything unusual. Hastings watched her closely, noting the slight tremor in her hands. She was nervous, but why? Was it fear or something else? Poirot seemed satisfied for the moment. Thank you, mademoiselle. We may speak again. As they walked away, Hastings whispered. She's lying, isn't she? Just like the others. Poirot nodded. Yes, but her lie is different. She is not hiding guilt, I think, but fear. We must watch her closely, Hastings. Your Cinderella may yet lead us to the truth. The day ended with no further breakthroughs, but Poirot's mind was far from idle. He spent the evening poring over his notes, cross-referencing details, building a picture only he could see. Hastings, meanwhile, wrestled with his feelings for Bella, torn between his duty to the case and the pull of his heart. As the sun set over Merlinville, casting long shadows across the golf course, the mystery deepened. The The suspects, Jack, Madame de Broglie, and now Bello, each held a piece of the puzzle, but the full picture remained elusive. And behind it all, the ghost of Georges Queneau loomed, a spectre from a past that refused to stay buried. Poirot closed his notebook, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we will find another piece of this puzzle. The truth is close, I can feel it." Hastings nodded, but his thoughts were on Bella, on the golf course, on the shadows that seemed to grow longer with each passing day. The case was far from over, and he knew that the next revelation would change everything. Chapter 4. The second corpse. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Merlinville golf course, its manicured greens now marred by the grim discovery that had shaken the sleepy French town to its core. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the crime scene, his small, precise figure dwarfed by the sprawling fairway. His hands were clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as he surveyed the shallow grave where Paul Renaud's body had been found, stabbed through the back and hastily buried. The air was thick with the scent of dew and freshly turned earth, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere, his little grey cells already worried with the puzzle before him. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings fidgeted, his eyes darting between the police officers cordoning off the area and the distant figure of a woman who had caught his attention earlier that morning. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding, "you must cease this distraction. The heart, it is a fine thing, but the mind, it must be focused. We are in the presence of death, and death demands our respect." Hastings flushed, adjusting his hat. "Sorry, Poirot, it's just that woman over there. I swear she's the one from the train, the one who said hell at the window. She's here, in Merlinville." Poirot's mustache twitched, but his eyes remained fixed on the grave. "Cinderella, as you call her, may be of interest, Hastings, but not yet. First, we must attend to the matter at hand. A second body, they say. Most curious." The words hung in the air as Inspector Giraud of the Paris Street approached, his strides long and purposeful, his expression one of barely concealed disdain. Giraud was young, brash and confident in his modern methods, a stark contrast to Poirot's meticulous, almost old-fashioned approach. His slicked-back hair and sharp suit gave him the air of a man who believed he had already solved the case. "Monsieur Poirot," Giraud said, his tone dripping with condescension, "I see. You're still poking around. Found anything useful, or are you just admiring the scenery?" Poirot's eyes twinkled unperturbed. "The scenery, Inspector, is most revealing, but tell me, what is this talk of a second corpse? It is not every day that a golf course becomes a graveyard." Giraud smirked, clearly relishing the chance to upstage the Belgian detective. "Follow me, and try to keep up. We found it not far from here, near the 7th hole. Same dagger, same method. It's a messy business, but I've got my eye on the sun. Jack Renaud, motive, opportunity, he's got it all." Poirot raised an eyebrow but said nothing, gesturing for Giraud to lead the way. Hastings trailed behind, his thoughts still half occupied by the mysterious woman he'd dubbed Cinderella. As they crossed the fairway, the grass crunching underfoot, Hastings couldn't shake the image of her fiery eyes and the way she'd vanished into the crowd at the train station. But Poirot's sharp glance pulled him back to the present. The second crime scene was a grim mirror of the first. A shallow pit, hastily dug, held the body of a man who appeared to be a tramp, his clothes tattered, his face gaunt, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. The same ornate dagger that had killed Paul Renaud protruded from his chest, the wound eerily identical. A small crowd of officers and curious onlookers had gathered, their whispers forming a low hum in the morning air. Giraud waved him back, his voice sharp. "Clear the area. This is a crime scene, not a circus." He turned to Poirot, his chest puffed out. "Well, what do you make of it? 2 bodies, same weapon, same place. Looks like our killer's getting sloppy." Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands hovering over the dagger without touching it. His eyes scanned every detail, the angle of the blade, the dirt under the tramp's fingernails, the faint tremor in the man's limbs. "Sloppy, you say," he murmured. "Nan, Inspector, this is not sloppiness, this is intention." Hastings frowned, leaning closer. "Intention? You mean the killer wanted us to find this body too?" Poirot stood, brushing a speck of dirt from his sleeve. "Precisely, Hastings. But why? That is the question. Why 2 bodies so close together with the same weapon? And this man, this pauvre hare, what role does he play in the drama of Paul Renaud's death?" Giraud snorted. "You're overcomplicating things, Poirot. The dagger belongs to Eloise Renaud. Jack had access to it, and he's got a fortune to gain. Case closed." Poirot's smile was thin, almost pitying. "Closed, you say? Oh, Inspector, the case is just beginning to open, like a flower in the morning sun. Tell me, have you examined the body closely?" Giraud hesitated, then waved a hand dismissively. "Of course. Stabbed, just like Renaud. Dead for maybe a day, tops." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A day, you say? And the wound, did you notice anything unusual?" Giraud's confidence faltered for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "It's a stab wound. What's there to notice?" Poirot turned to the examining doctor, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Monsieur le docteur, your opinion, if you please. The cause of death." The doctor adjusted his glasses, his voice steady but cautious. "Well, the stab wound is certainly fatal, but there's something odd. The body shows signs of an epileptic seizure, rigidity in the limbs, froth at the mouth. I'd wager he was already dead, or near it, before the dagger struck." A murmur rippled through the gathered officers. Giro's face darkened. "What are you saying?" "That someone stabbed a corpse." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactamente, Inspector. This man was not killed by the dagger. He died of natural causes, a seizure, as the doctor suggests. The stabbing, it was, how do you say, an afterthought." Hastings' jaw dropped. An afterthought? But why would anyone stab a dead man? Poirot turned, his gaze sweeping the golf course, as if the answer lay hidden in the rolling hills. To confuse Hastings, to mislead. This second corpse is not a victim, it is a prop, a piece of the puzzle placed here to obscure the truth. Giraud crossed his arms, his skepticism palpable. "You're saying this is some kind of theatrical stunt? Ridiculous. I'm sticking with Jack Renaud. He's got the motive, the means, and no alibi." Poirot shook his head, almost sadly. "Motive, yes, means perhaps. But alibi, we shall see. For now I must speak with Madame Renaud. There are questions that demand answers." As they left the crime scene, Hastings couldn't resist glancing back toward the crowd, searching for the woman he'd seen earlier. To his surprise, she was there standing near a cluster of trees, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. She met his gaze for a fleeting moment before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Hastings' heart raced, but Poirot's firm grip on his arm pulled him forward. "Focus, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low. "Your Cinderella may yet have a part to play, but for now we must follow the thread of truth." At the Villa Genevieve, the Renaud family's elegant home, Eloise Renaud sat in a high-backed chair, her face pale but composed. The room was adorned with fine tapestries and heavy drapes, a stark contrast to the grim events unfolding outside. Poirot sat opposite her, his posture impeccable, his eyes searching her face for any flicker of emotion. Hastings stood by the window half listening, his thoughts drifting to the mysterious woman. "Madame," Poirot began, his tone gentle but probing, "the discovery of this second body is most distressing. Can you tell me, was there anyone at all who might have wished your husband harm?" Eloise's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "Paul was a wealthy man, Monsieur Poirot. Wealth attracts envy, as you know, but I cannot think of anyone who would do this." Her voice broke and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "And the dagger, madame, it is yours, is it not?" She nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yes, it was a gift from Paul years ago. I kept it in my dressing room. I don't know how it came to be used." Hastings shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of her words. Poirot, however, pressed on. "And the night of the murder, you said you were bound and gagged. Yet the bindings, they were loose, were they not? Almost as if they were meant to be removed." Eloise's eyes widened, a flash of fear crossing her face. I don't know what you mean. I was terrified. Two men broke in. They tied me up." "Two men," Poirot interrupted, his voice soft but firm. "Yet you saw nothing of their faces, heard nothing of their voices." She shook her head, her fingers twisting the handkerchief. "It was dark. I was so frightened." Poirot sat back, his expression unreadable. "Very well, madame, we shall speak again. For now, I must examine your husband's study. There may be answers there." As they left the room, Hastings whispered, "Do you think she's hiding something, Poirot?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Everyone hides something, Hastings. The question is, what?" The study was a treasure trove of papers, ledgers, and personal effects, all meticulously organized, much to Poirot's approval. He moved with purpose, his gloved hands sifting through documents, pausing occasionally to examine a letter or a photograph. Hastings, less methodical, paced the room, his mind still half on the woman he'd seen. "Look at this, Poirot," Hastings said, holding up a framed photograph of a younger Paul Renaud with a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Madame d'Albret, the charming neighbor. "Could this be her? They look awfully close." Poirot took the photograph, his eyes narrowing. "Most interesting, Hastings, this woman. Yes, she could indeed be Madame du Breul, but why is she in this photograph taken so many years ago, and why does it sit in a place of prominence?" Hastings frowned. "You think she's involved?" Poirot placed the photograph back on the desk, his fingers lingering on the frame. "I think, Hastings, that nothing in this case is as it seems. This second corpse, this photograph, the dagger, they are all pieces of a puzzle, and I heard Poirot shall fit them together." As they left the study, a commotion outside drew their attention. A young woman was arguing with a police officer at the villa's gate, her voice sharp and insistent. Hastings' heart leapt. It was her, his, Cinderella. She wore a simple dress, her auburn hair pinned loosely, but her presence was electric. "That's it," Hastings exclaimed, starting toward the gate. Poirot grabbed his arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Patience, mon ami. Let us observe, before we act." The woman, undeterred by the officer's protests, pushed past and approached them. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite her agitation. "I need to speak with you. It's about the murder." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Mademoiselle, You have my attention. Who are you, and what do you know? She hesitated, glancing at Hastings, who blushed under her gaze. My name is Bella Duvin, she said. I'm a performer. Passing through Merlinville, I saw something that night. On the golf course, Hastings' heart raced, but Poirot's expression remained calm. And what did you see, Mademoiselle Duvin? Bella's eyes darted nervously. I saw a man digging, late at night, near where they found the bodies. He looked like Jack Renaud. The air seemed to thicken with tension. Giraud, who had overheard, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with triumph. You see, Poirot, I told you it was the son. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Mademoiselle, you are certain it was Jack Renaud? Bella bit her lip, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. It was dark, but I think so. I don't know. I just thought you should know. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Mercy, mademoiselle. You have done well to come forward. We shall speak again. As Bella turned to leave, Hastings couldn't resist calling after her. Wait. I saw you on the train. You said hell at the window. Why? She smiled faintly, a spark of mischief in her eyes. I dropped my cigarette case. It was a gift. I was annoyed. That's all. With that she slipped away, leaving Hastings staring after her. Giraud chuckled. Your friend's got it bad, Poirot. But this Bella Duvin, she's just confirmed my case. Jack Renaud's going down. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps Inspector, or perhaps Mademoiselle Duvin has given us something else entirely, a thread to pull, a truth to uncover. That evening Poirot sat in their modest hotel room, a cup of tisane in hand, his eyes distant. Hastings, unable to sit still, recounted his encounter with Bella. She's extraordinary, Poirot. But do you think she's telling the truth? Poirot sipped his tisane, his expression thoughtful. Truth, Hastings, is like a diamond. It has many facets, and each must be examined carefully. Mademoiselle Duvin saw something. Yes, but whether it was Jack Renaud, that remains to be seen. Hastings frowned. But the second corpse, does it mean why stab a man who's already dead? Poirot set his cup down, his eyes gleaming. The second corpse, Hastings, is the key. It was not meant to be a victim, but a distraction. Someone wished to muddy the waters, to make us believe in a pattern that does not exist. But why? That is what we must discover. He rose, pacing the room with a restless energy. Consider, Hastings. Paul Renaud writes to me, begging for help, yet he does not specify the threat. He is found dead, stabbed with his wife's dagger, buried on a golf course. Then, a second body, also stabbed, also buried, but already dead from a seizure. And now, a photograph linking Renaud to Madame Dubreuil, a woman with secrets of her own. These are not random events, they are a tapestry, woven with purpose. Hastings leaned forward, caught up in Poirot's intensity. So what's our next move? Poirot stopped, his eyes blazing with determination. We return to the golf course, Hastings. We examine every blade of grass, every grain of sand. And we speak again with Madame Renaud, for I believe she knows more than she says. The second corpse is the key, mon ami. It will unlock the truth. As they prepared to leave, Hastings' thoughts drifted to Bella Duvin, her fiery spirit lingering in his mind. But Poirot's words echoed louder. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of Merlinville, and they would find it, no matter the cost. The golf course at dusk was a haunting place, the fairways bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Poirot moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the ground near the second grave. Hastings followed, his flashlight casting erratic beams across the grass. The air was cool, the silence broken only by the distant call of a nightbird. Poirot said suddenly, kneeling beside a patch of disturbed earth. He pointed to a faint impression in the soil, barely visible. A footprint, Hastings, but not like the others. This one is smaller, more delicate. Hastings squinted, barely, were able to make it out. A woman's footprint. Poirot nodded. Perhaps, or a man with very small feet, but it tells us something, does it not? Someone else was here. Someone who did not wish to be seen. They continued their search, Poirot's attention drawn to a small object glinting in the grass, a cigarette case, engraved with the initials B.D. Hastings' heart skipped a beat. Bella's, she said she dropped it. Poirot picked it up, his gloved fingers turning it over carefully. Indeed. But was it dropped by accident, or placed here with purpose? We shall see, Hastings. We shall see. As they returned to the villa, the weight of the case pressed on Hastings' mind. Bella Duvin, the second corpse, the photograph of Madame Dubreuil, it was all connected. But how? Poirot, as always, seemed one step ahead. His mind racing through possibilities Hastings could barely grasp. The next morning, Poirot requested another audience with Eloise Renaud. She received them in the same backed chair, her composure fraying at the edges. The photograph of her husband with Madame Dubreuil sat on a nearby table, its presence like a silent accusation. Madame Poirot began, his voice gentle but unrelenting. There is a matter we must discuss. This photograph, your husband and Madame Dubreuil, they knew each other, did they not? Long before Merlinville. Eloise's face paled, her hands clutching the handkerchief. I don't know what you mean. Madame Dubreuil is our neighbor, nothing more. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Come, madame, let us not play games. I have reason to believe that Madame d'Aubreuil is not who she claims to be. And your husband, Paul Rinaldi, too, had secrets. Secrets that may have led to his death. Eloise's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Poirot pressed on. The second corpse, Madame, was not killed by the dagger, but by a seizure. Why, then, was it stabbed? To create confusion, perhaps. To protect someone. Her eyes flicked to the photograph, then back to Poirot. I don't know, she whispered. I swear, I don't know. Poirot stood, his expression softening. Very well, Madame, but know this. The truth cannot remain hidden forever, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall find it. As they left the villa, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that Eloise was holding back something vital. But before he could voice his thoughts, a figure emerged from the shadows. Bella Dubon, her face pale but determined. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling. I lied. I didn't see Jack Renaud that night. I was there, on the golf course. I dropped my cigarette case. But I didn't see anyone digging. I made it up to protect someone. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And who, mademoiselle, were you protecting? Bella hesitated, then whispered, Jack. I love him, I thought. I thought if I said I saw him, it would throw suspicion elsewhere. Hastings' heart sank, but Poirot's expression was unreadable. Merci, mademoiselle. Your honesty is most appreciated. Now go, we shall speak again. As Bella vanished into the morning mist, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice heavy. She's in love with Jack. Does that mean she's involved? Poirot's smile was faint. Love, Hastings, is a powerful motive, but whether it leads to murder, that is what we must discover. The second corpse, the cigarette case, the photograph, they are all threads in the same tapestry. And soon, mon ami, we shall see the pattern. The chapter closed with Poirot standing alone on the golf course, the wind tugging at his coat. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The second corpse was the key, he had said fade, and as the sun rose over Merlinville, Hercule Poirot knew that the truth was within his grasp if only he could unravel the final threads. Chapter 5. The ghost of George's Knopf. Morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Villa Genevieve, casting delicate patterns on the polished wooden floor of the dining room where Hercule Poirot sat, his breakfast untouched. His small, precise hands were folded neatly on the table, and his egg-shaped head tilted slightly as he stared at the cup of café au lait before him, its steam rising in lazy curls. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated opposite, was less composed, his fork hovering over a half-eaten croissant as his mind wandered to the mysterious woman he had dubbed Cinderella, the events of the past days, the murder of Paul Renaud, the discovery of a second body, and the mounting complexities of the case had left Hastings restless, his romantic inclinations warring with his duty to assist Poirot. Mon ami, Poirot said suddenly, his voice cutting through Hastings' reverie, you are distracted. This will not do. The little grey cells, they require focus, not the daydreams of a heart in love. His green eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and reproach. Hastings flushed, setting his fork down. I'm sorry, Poirot. It's just this case is a tangle. And then there's that girl from the train. I can't stop thinking about her. She's here in Merlinville, you know. I saw her yesterday near the golf course. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his mustache twitching. The young lady who exclaimed, hell, at the window. I recall your fascination. But, Hastings, the heart must wait. We have a murderer to catch, and the threads of this mystery are beginning to form a pattern. You must trust Poirot, Hastings sighed, pushing his plate aside. You're right, of course. What's our next move? That second body on the golf course, it's thrown everything into chaos, and Giro's no help strutting about with his magnifying glass like he solved the case already. Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. Giraud is a bloodhound, sniffing for footprints and cigarette ash. He sees only the surface. But we, Hastings, we look deeper into the mind, the motives, the secrets buried in the past, and I have a suspicion that the past is where we must go. This morning I traveled to Paris. Paris? Hastings blinked, surprised. Why Paris? The crime is here in Merlinville. Poirot leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Because, mon cher, the name Georges Queneau is not merely a shadow in this case, it is the key. I must consult the archives of the Paris Street. There is a story there, one that may explain why Paul Renaud lies dead in a shallow grave. Hastings frowned, recalling the fleeting mention of Queneau in the previous day's investigation. You think this old murder case from 22 years ago is connected? How Poirot tapped his temple lightly. The little grey cells, they whisper. Renaud's death, the second corpse, the dagger, the blackmailer point to a history that has not been laid to rest. Come, prepare yourself. You will remain here and observe. Watch Madame d'Aubreuil, watch the sun, Jack, and yes, keep an eye on your Cinderella, but do not let her charm you into indiscretion. Hastings nodded, though his thoughts lingered on the mysterious woman. As Poirot rose and adjusted his immaculate suit, Hastings couldn't help but marvel at his friend's unshakable confidence. The Belgian detective was like a chess master, seeing moves ahead while others scrambled to understand the board. By noon, Poirot was aboard a train to Paris, his small valise packed with only the essentials: a notebook, a fountain pen, and the photograph of Madame de Breuil he had discreetly obtained from a servant at the Villa Genevieve. The photograph, though recent, bore an uncanny resemblance to a face he had seen in old newspaper clippings about the Queneau case, a face he suspected belonged to Madame Baroldi, the femme fatale at the heart of that scandal. The train rattled through the French countryside, fields of green stretching endlessly under a cerulean sky. Poirot's mind, however, was far from the pastoral beauty outside. He opened his notebook and reviewed the facts of the Queneau case, piecing together the fragments he had gleaned from Merlinville's gossip and his own memory. 22 years ago, Georges Queneau had been the lover of Madame Baroldi, a beautiful and cunning woman married to a wealthy but aging Frenchman. The husband was found dead, stabbed in their Paris apartment, and suspicion fell on Queneau and Madame Baroldi. The trial was a sensation. Queneau fled, never to be found, while Madame Baroldi was acquitted, her charm and tearful testimony swaying the jury. The case faded into obscurity, but Poirot's instincts told him it was no coincidence that Paul Renaud, a man of mysterious origins, had settled in Merlinville near a woman who might be Madame Baroldi herself. At the Paris street, Poirot was greeted by an old acquaintance, Inspector Lefebvre, a grizzled man with a penchant for cigars and a grudging respect for Poirot's methods. "Hercule, you old fox," Lefebvre said, clapping him on the shoulder. "What brings you sniffing around ancient history?" "The Queneau case," Poirot replied, his tone brisk. "I need everything: reports, testimonies, photographs, and I need it quickly." Lefebvre raised an eyebrow but led Poirot to the dusty archives in the basement. For hours, Poirot pored over yellow documents, his fingers tracing lines of faded ink. The reports confirmed his suspicions. Madame Baroldi had been described as a woman of striking beauty, with dark hair and a captivating smile, much like Madame de Breuil. A photograph, grainy but unmistakable, showed her standing beside Georges Queneau, a man with sharp features and a guarded expression. Poirot's heart quickened. The resemblance to Paul Renaud was uncanny. By evening, Poirot emerged from the archives, his notebook filled with meticulous notes. He sent a telegram to Hastings. "Return tomorrow. Queneau is the key. Observe Darbrot closely." HP back in Merlinville, Hastings was struggling to follow Poirot's instructions. The town was abuzz with gossip about the second body, a tramp, whose death had baffled the local police. Inspector Giraud, with his characteristic swagger, was parading about the golf course, measuring distances and collecting soil samples. Hastings, however, was more interested in the Villa Marguerite, where Madame de Breuil and her daughter Marthe resided. He had seen Cinderella Bella Duvant, as he now knew her, near the villa that morning. She was a stage performer, vibrant and bold, with a laugh that echoed in his mind, but her presence in Merlinville puzzled him. Why was she here, and why had she seemed so nervous when he approached her? Determined to uncover something useful, Hastings lingered near the villa, pretending to admire the roses in a nearby garden. He overheard Marthe Daubreuil speaking to her mother in hushed tones on the veranda. "Jack mustn't know," Marthe whispered, her voice sharp. "If he finds out, it's all over." Madame de Breuil's reply was inaudible, but her posture, tense, almost predatory, sent a chill down Hastings' spine. He retreated, his mind racing. What were they hiding, and how did Bella fit into this web? That evening, Bella Duvant appeared at the hotel where Hastings and Poirot were staying. She was dressed in a simple blue frock, her auburn hair catching the light of the gas lamps. "Captain Hastings," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to speak with you. It's about Jack Renaud." Hastings, caught off guard, ushered her to a quiet corner of the lounge. "Miss Devon, what's wrong? Do you know something about the murder?" Bella's eyes darted nervously. I think I killed him, Paul Renaud. It was an accident, I swear. Jack and we were arguing about money, and I was so angry. I didn't mean to do it." Hastings stared, his heart pounding. "You're confessing to murder. Bella, this is serious. You must tell Poirot." "No," she cried, gripping his arm. "Please, don't tell him. I only told you because I trust you. Jack doesn't know. I was trying to protect him." Hastings hesitated, torn between his loyalty to Poirot and his sympathy for Bella. Her story didn't add up. Her distress seemed genuine, but the details were vague. "Stay here," he said finally. "I'll get Poirot. He'll know what to do." But when he returned, Bella was gone, leaving only a faint scent of jasmine and a crumpled handkerchief on the chair. Poirot returned to Merlinville the next morning, his expression one of quiet triumph. He found Hastings pacing the hotel lobby, his face a mask of agitation. "Hastings, you look as if you've seen a ghost. What has happened?" Hastings recounted Bella's confession and her sudden disappearance. Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mon ami, you have been played. This confession, it is a distraction, nothing more. The little grey cells tell me that Mademoiselle Duvant is not the killer, but she knows something, and I suspect she is protecting Jack Renaud." "But Poirot," Hastings protested. "She was so convincing." "And what about Madame de Breuil? I overheard her and Marthe talking about keeping something from Jack." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Excellent, Hastings. You have observed even if your heart clouds your judgment. Now listen carefully. What I discovered in Paris changes everything. Paul Renaud was not who he claimed to be. He was Georges Quinault. Hastings gasped. Quinault, the man from the old murder case. Renaud, or rather Quinault, faked his death 22 years ago to escape justice. He fled to South America, built a fortune, and returned to France under a new identity. But someone recognized him, someone who has been blackmailing him for years. Madame Delbrue, Hastings said. The pieces falling into place. She's Madame Beroldi, isn't she? Poirot nodded. She has been living here, close to Renaud, bleeding him dry with the threat of exposure. But there is more. I believe Renaud planned to stage his death again, using the tramp's body to fool his blackmailer. The second corpse, Hastings, it was meant to be Renaud's double, a deception to escape Madame Delbrue's grasp. But someone discovered his plan and killed him first. Hastings rubbed his temples, struggling to keep up. So who killed him? Madame Delbrue Moth. Bella. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Patience, mon ami. The truth is near, but we must tread carefully. Madame Delbrue is a spider, weaving a web of deceit, but she is not the only one with secrets. We must watch, we must listen, and we must wait for the killer to reveal themselves. The day unfolded with a series of interviews at the villa. Genevieve, Eloise, Renaud, pale and composed, recounted the night of the murder, the masked intruders, the binding of her hands, the theft of her husband's papers. Poirot listened, his eyes narrowing at inconsistencies in her story. Why, he wondered, had the intruders left her unharmed? And why was the dagger, her own, found in both bodies? Jacques Renaud, summoned from Calais where he had been staying, was sullen and evasive. He admitted to arguing with his father about money but denied any involvement in the murder. I wasn't even here, he insisted, his hands clenched. I was in Calais, meeting Bella. Poirot's questions were relentless, probing Jack's relationship with Marthe Delbrue. You are fond of Mademoiselle Marthe Nan, and yet you keep company with Mademoiselle Duvon. A complicated heart, Monsieur. Jack flushed, his jaw tightening. Marthe and I are engaged. Bella's just a friend. Hastings, watching from the corner, noted the flicker of guilt in Jack's eyes. Was he lying about Bella, or was there something else he was hiding? The interview with Madame Delbrue was the most revealing. She received Poirot and Hastings in her elegant drawing room, her dark eyes assessing them with cool calculation. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you, I had no reason to harm Paul Renaud. He was a dear friend, nothing more. Poirot's smile was polite but icy. A friend, Madame, or perhaps a man who owed you a great deal. Tell me, do you recall a certain Georges Quinault? Her face paled, but only for a moment. I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice steady. I am Madame Delbrue, a widow living quietly. With my daughter, indeed, Poirot said, rising. But the past, Madame has a way of catching up, and I, Hercule Poirot, will see that it does. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings walked the golf course, the scene of the murders. The air was cool, the fairways bathed in the golden light of dusk. Poirot paused near the shallow grave where Renaud's body had been found. His expression, contemplative. Hastings, he said, this case is a puzzle of human nature. Greed, love, fear, they are all here, woven together. The second corpse was meant to be a deception, but it became the key to the truth. Whoever killed Renaud knew of his plan to fake his death. They used it against him, striking when he was vulnerable. Hastings shivered, the weight of the mystery pressing on him and Bella's confession. You don't believe her, do you? No, Poirot said firmly. Her confession is a lie, but not without purpose. She protects someone, Jack, perhaps, or another, but the true killer. I am close, Hastings, very close. The chapter closed with Poirot standing alone on the golf course, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. His mind churned, piecing together the final threads of the mystery. The ghost of Georges Quinault loomed large, but it was the living who held the answers, and Poirot, with his little grey cells, was determined to uncover them. Chapter 6. The Blackmail. Trapped. The sun hung low over Merlinville-sur-Mer, casting a golden sheen across the rolling fairways of the golf course, its manicured greens now infamous for their grim secrets. Hercule Poirot sat in the small parlor of the Hôtel du Fer, his small, precise hands folded neatly on the table before him. His eyes, sharp as ever, glinted with the intensity of a man whose mind was a whirlwind of deductions, each piece of the puzzle slotting into place with the inevitability of a perfectly executed chess move. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated opposite, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his thoughts drifting to the enigmatic Bella Duvernor. Was it Dulcie? The revelation of her twin sister had thrown him into a state of romantic confusion, a distraction. Poirot had noted with mild amusement. Monsieur Hastings, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the haze of Hastings' daydreams, you must focus. The heart, it is a splendid thing, but it must not cloud the mind. We are close, very close, to unraveling the truth of this affair. Hastings flushed, straightening in his chair. Sorry, Poirot, it's just, this case, it's a tangle, isn't it? Renaud's death, the tramp, Madame Delbrue, and now Bella, Dulcie confessing to murder. I can't make heads or tails of it. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his satisfaction with the complexity of the case. A tangle, yes, but one that can be unraveled with order and method. Let us review. Paul Renaud, who we now know was Georges Cunning, planned to stage his own death once more. Why? To escape the blackmail of Madame de Breuil, who, as Madame Baroldi, knew his true identity, but someone discovered this plan and turned it against him, plunging the dagger into his back. The question is, who? Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. You think it's Marthe de Breuil, don't you? Her mother's involved, and she's sweet on Jack Renaud. If she thought Renaud was going to disinherit him, precisement, Poirot interrupted, raising a finger. The motive, it lies in the inheritance, but also in the heart. Marthe is ambitious, and ambition, when paired with love, can be a dangerous brew, but we must be certain. To catch a killer, we must set a trap. The parlor door creaked open, and a waiter entered with a tray of coffee. Poirot, ever particular, inspected the cups before accepting one, his movements deliberate. Hastings, less patient, took a sip and grimaced at the bitterness. What sort of trap? He asked, setting the cup down. Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. We must provoke the killer into action. Madame Renaud must announce that she intends to disinherit Jack. This will unsettle the murderer, for it disrupts their plans. If Marthe is our culprit, she will act, and we will be ready. Hastings' eyes widened. That's risky, Poirot. If Marthe is as desperate as you think, risk is necessary, mon ami. But fear not. Poirot does not leave things to chance. We will watch, we will wait, and we will act. The plan was set in motion that afternoon. Poirot, with his characteristic flair for drama, arranged a meeting with Eloise Renaud at the Villa Genevieve. The widow, still pale from the ordeal of her husband's death, sat rigidly in her backed chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room was heavy with the scent of roses, their vibrant blooms a stark contrast to the somber mood. Poirot, pacing slowly, explained his strategy with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Madame, he began, his tone gentle yet commanding, you must make it known, subtly but convincingly, that you intend to alter your late husband's will. Jack, your son, will no longer inherit the bulk of the estate. Perhaps you will donate it to charity, or divide it among distant relatives. The news must reach certain ears. Eloise's eyes, reddened from grief, widened. But why, Monsieur Poirot? Jack is my son. I would never. It is a ruse, Madame Poirot assured her, his voice soothing. A necessary deception to draw out the one who killed your husband. You must trust me. She hesitated, her fingers twisting the lace of her handkerchief. And if this killer strikes again? Poirot's gaze was unwavering. They will not succeed. I, Hercule Poirot, will ensure it. Hastings, standing by the window, watched the exchange with a mix of admiration and unease. Eloise's courage, despite her fragility, was remarkable, but the plan felt like tempting fate. He glanced outside, where the golf course stretched into the distance, its fairways now a silent witness to murder. The thought of Belle Ordonne in his mind, her spirited laugh echoing from their train encounter. Was she truly involved, or was her confession a misguided act of love for Jack? The announcement was made that evening at a small gathering of neighbors and local officials, orchestrated by Poirot with the precision of a stage play. Eloise, dressed in mourning black, spoke with quiet resolve, her voice carrying just enough conviction to be believed. In light of recent events, she said, her eyes flickering to Poirot for reassurance, I have decided to honor my husband's memory by redirecting his estate to charitable causes. Jack will of course be cared for, but the bulk of the fortune will serve a greater good. The room buzzed with murmurs. Marthe de Breuil, standing near her mother, stiffened, her delicate features tightening. Hastings, positioned near the door, watched her closely, noting the flash of anger in her eyes. Madame de Breuil, ever poised, placed a hand on her daughter's arm, but Marthe shook it off, her gaze darting to Jack, who stood awkwardly by his mother's side. Poirot, unobtrusive in a corner, observed it all, his eyes like twin beacons scanning for the smallest clue. Hastings leaned toward him, whispering, Did you see Martha's reaction? She looked furious. Indeed, Poirot murmured, his voice barely audible. The seed is planted. Now we wait for the flower to bloom. The night was restless. Hastings, unable to sleep, paced his room at the Hotel du Fer, his thoughts a jumble of clues and emotions. The case was a labyrinth, each turn revealing new complexities. Renaud's past as Georges Cunning, the blackmail by Madame de Breuil, the second corpse, and now Belle Ordonne confessing to a crime Poirot dismissed. It was maddening. He glanced at the clock. 2 a.m. The silence of Merlinville was oppressive, broken only by the distant crash of waves. A soft knock startled him. Opening the door, he found Poirot fully dressed, his expression alert. Hastings, come quickly. There is movement at the Villa Genevieve. They hurried through the darkened streets, the cool night air sharp against their faces. Poirot's pace was brisk, his cane tapping rhythmically on the cobblestones. What's happening? Hastings asked, struggling to keep up. A message from our friend, the concierge, Poirot replied. He saw a figure near the villa. We must be swift. The Villa Genevieve loomed ahead, its windows dark save for a faint glow in the upper floor. Poirot, with surprising agility, led the way to the garden, where they crouched behind a hedge. Hastings' heart pounded as he strained to see in the moonlight. A figure, cloaked in shadow, moved stealthily toward the rear entrance. The glint of metal in their hand sent a chill down Hastings' spine. "It is as I thought," Poirot whispered. "The trap has sprung." The figure slipped inside, and Poirot motioned for Hastings to follow. They entered through a side door, moving silently through the darkened halls. A muffled cry from upstairs quickened their steps. They reached Eloise's bedroom just as a scream pierced the air. Bursting in, they found Eloise struggling with Marthe Dalbrul, a dagger raised in the girl's hand. Before Hastings could react, another figure, Dulcie Devon, unmistakable in her stage performance, poised tackled Marthe, sending the dagger clattering to the floor. "Enough," Poirot's voice rang out, commanding the room. Marthe, pinned by Dulcie, glared defiantly, her chest heaving. Eloise, trembling, sank onto the bed, unharmed but shaken. Hastings, his pulse racing, helped Dulcie restrain Marthe while Poirot retrieved the dagger. "Mademoiselle Dalbrul," he said, his tone icy, "your ambition has betrayed you. You killed Paul Renaud, did you not?" Martha's eyes blazed, but she said nothing. Poirot continued, his voice relentless. "You overheard his plan to stage his death to escape your mother's blackmail. You saw an opportunity. If Renaud was dead, Jack would inherit, and you, as his beloved, would share in the wealth. But when Eloise announced her intention to disinherit him, you could not allow it." The room was silent, save for Martha's ragged breathing. Dulcie, still holding her, looked at Hastings, her eyes a mix of relief and determination. "I saw her sneaking in," she whispered. "I knew something was wrong." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Mademoiselle Duvin, your courage has saved a life tonight. But there is more to this tale." He turned to Marthe, his gaze piercing. "You stabbed Renaud after he dug the grave, believing his plan would proceed. Then, to confuse the investigation, you killed the tramp, using the same dagger, and placed him in the grave. But you did not count on the little gray cells of her." Poirot. Martha's defiance crumbled, and she slumped, her silence an admission. Hastings, still reeling, looked at Dulcie, his heart swelling with admiration. "You were brilliant," he said, unable to hide his awe. Poirot, ever practical, summoned the local police, who arrived to take Marthe into custody. As she was led away, Madame Dubrul appeared at the door, her face a mask of shock. Without a word, she turned and vanished into the night, her fate uncertain. The villa settled into an uneasy calm. Eloise, recovering, thanked Poirot and Dulcie profusely. Hastings, standing close to Dulcie, felt a spark of something deeper than admiration. "You're not Bella, are you?" he asked softly. She smiled, her eyes warm. "I'm Dulcie. Bella's my sister. She confessed to protect Jack, but I couldn't let her take the fall." Hastings nodded, his confusion giving way to clarity. "You're remarkable, Dulcie," Poirot, overhearing, chuckled. "Mon ami, you have a talent for finding romance in the midst of murder. But come, we have work to do. The case is not yet closed." The following morning, Poirot gathered everyone at the villa to tie up the loose ends. He explained how Martha's greed and love for Jack drove her to murder, how she exploited Renaud's plan to her advantage. The tramp's death, he clarified, was a desperate attempt to muddy the waters. But Poirot's focus on the psychology of the crime, Martha's ambition. Her mother's blackmail had unraveled the truth. Eloise, grateful, rescinded her false announcement about the will, ensuring Jack's inheritance. Jack, shaken but relieved, vowed to honor his father's memory. Dulcie, standing beside Hastings, squeezed his hand, a silent promise of something more. As the sun rose over Moonville, Poirot stood on the golf course, his eyes scanning the horizon. "The trap was successful, Hastings," he said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "But we must remain vigilant. Madame Dubrul is still at large, and the game is not over until all players are accounted for." Hastings, his heart light with thoughts of Dulcie, nodded. "What's next, Poirot?" Poirot's mustache curved into a smile. "Next, mon ami, we wait for the final act." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Martha's arrest sent ripples through Merlinville, with the local press dubbing the case the golf course nightmare. Poirot, ever meticulous, spent hours reviewing the evidence, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Hastings, meanwhile, found himself drawn to Dulcie, their conversations growing longer, their connection deepening. She told him of her life on the stage, her twin sister Bella's fierce loyalty, and her own determination to see justice done. Evening, as they walked along the cliffs, Dulcie paused, her eyes on the sea. "I thought I'd lost everything when Bella confessed," she said. "But you and Monsieur Poirot, you gave me hope." Hastings, emboldened, took her hand. "Dulcie, no, this is sudden. But would you consider a future with a chap like me?" Her laugh was like music, and she leaned closer. "Arthur Hastings, you're a romantic fool. But yes, I'd consider it." The case, though nearing its end, still held secrets. Poirot, in a private moment, shared his suspicions about Madame Dubrul's whereabouts. "She is clever," he said, "but she cannot hide forever. Her role in this tragedy is not yet fully told." As the investigation wound down, Poirot prepared to confront Giraud, whose bluster had faded in the face of Poirot's success. The wager, though a minor detail, loomed large, a testament to Poirot's unyielding belief in his methods. Hastings, caught between his loyalty to Poirot and his budding love for Dulcie, felt the weight of the case lifting, replaced by the promise of a new chapter. The golf course, once a place of horror, seemed to soften in the morning light, its greens a reminder of the order Poirot had restored. As Hastings and Dulcie made plans to depart for South America, Poirot stood alone, his mind already turning to the next mystery. The trap had worked, the killer was caught, but the game, as always, continued. Chapter 7. The Villa Confrontation. The dawn broke over Merlinville-sur-Mer with a golden hue, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and the infamous golf course. Now a silent witness to the tragedy of Paul Renault's death, Hercule Poirot stood at the window of their modest hotel room, his silhouette sharp against the soft light filtering through the curtains. His hands were clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as if the very air whispered clues to his keen mind. Captain Arthur Hastings, still blearied from a restless night, sipped his coffee, watching his friend with a mix of admiration and exasperation. Poirot, Hastings began, setting his cup down with a clink. You've been staring out that window for an hour. What are you thinking about? The trap for the killer. Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming with that familiar spark of determination. The trap, mon ami, is but a thread in the tapestry of this case. We are close, very close, to unmasking the murderer. But we must be precise, like the swing of a golfer. Too much force, and the ball flies astray. Too little, and it falls short. Hastings frowned, rubbing his temples. You're speaking in riddles again. Can't you just tell me what's next? Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. Patience, Hastings. Today, we tighten the noose. Madame Renaud's announcement of Jack's disinheritance will stir the hornet's nest. The killer, whoever they may be, will not sit idly by. We must be ready. The plan, as Poirot had outlined the previous evening, was audacious yet simple. Eloise Renaud, still shaken by her husband's murder and the revelations about his past as Georges Queneau, had agreed to play her part. She would publicly declare at a gathering at the Villa Genevieve that she intended to alter her will, cutting Jack out entirely due to his reckless behavior. The announcement was a fabrication, of course, designed to provoke the true culprit into action. Poirot believed the killer was someone close to the family, someone whose motives were tangled in greed, love, or revenge, perhaps all three. By mid-morning, the Villa Genevieve buzzed with activity. Servants scurried about, preparing for the small but significant gathering of neighbors, local officials, and a few curious onlookers. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. Hastings, dressed in his best suit, felt out of place among the somber faces. He scanned the room for Dulcie Duvin, the woman he had come to know as Cinderella, whose spirited charm had captivated him since their chance meeting on the Calais Express. Her twin sister, Bella, had confessed to Renaud's murder to protect Jack, but Poirot had dismissed it as a noble but misguided act. Hastings' heart raced at the thought of seeing Dulcie again, though he knew Poirot would chide him for letting romance cloud his focus. Eloise Renaud stood at the center of the drawing room, her face pale but composed. She wore a black morning dress, her hands clasped tightly before her. The guests, including the enigmatic Madame d'Aubreuil and her daughter Marthe, stood in a loose semicircle, their eyes fixed on her. Inspector Giraud, ever the skeptic, lingered near the back, his arms crossed, his expression one of barely concealed disdain for Poirot's theatrics. Poirot himself stood near Eloise, his small frame radiating authority despite his unassuming appearance. Ladies and gentlemen, Eloise began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. I have called you here to make Anne Bourgois an important announcement. As you know, my husband, Paul Renaud, was taken from me in a most brutal manner. Our son Jack has been implicated in this tragedy, and though he remains under investigation, I have made a difficult decision. I intend to alter my will, removing Jack as my heir. His behavior has brought shame to our family, and I cannot in good conscience allow him to inherit. Murmur rippled through the room. Hastings caught Marthe d'Aubreul's sharp intake of breath, her delicate features tightening. Her mother, Madame d'Aubreuil, remained impassive, her dark eyes unreadable. Poirot's gaze darted between them, his little grey cells no doubt cataloguing every reaction. The announcement was a bombshell. As intended, Hastings watched Marthe closely, her cheeks flushed with anger and her hands clenched into fists. Jack, standing near his mother, looked stunned, his mouth agape. The room buzzed with whispers, and Hastings felt a pang of guilt for the young man. Knowing the disinheritance was a ruse, as the guests dispersed for refreshments, Poirot pulled Hastings aside. You see, mon ami, the seed is planted. Now we wait for the fruit to ripen, but who do you suspect? Hastings whispered, glancing at Marthe, who was now speaking heatedly with Jack in a corner. Marthe seemed furious, but could she really suspect everyone? Hastings, Poirot interrupted, his voice low. The heart of this crime is passion, greed, love, betrayal. Marthe d'Aubreuil is deeply in love with Jack, and the prospect of losing his inheritance may drive her to act. But we must also watch Madame d'Aubreuil. Her past as Madame Baroldi suggests a woman capable of great deception. The day wore on, the tension simmering beneath the polite chatter. Hastings found Dulcie near the garden doors, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. She smiled at him, her eyes warm but guarded. "Captain Hastings," she said, her voice teasing. "You look like a man with too many secrets." He chuckled, his nerves easing. "Only one or two, Miss Duvin. And you, are you keeping Bella secrets, or your own?" Her smile faltered, and she glanced toward Jack and Marthe. "Bella's in love with Jack, you know. She'd do anything for him. But Marthe, she's different. There's something fierce in her." Before Hastings could respond, a scream shattered the air. The guests froze, then rushed toward the sound, which came from the upper floor of the villa. Poirot led the charge, his short legs moving with surprising speed. Hastings followed, his heart pounding in the master bedroom. They found Eloise Renaud slumped against the wall, a knife in her hand, her dress torn. Marthe d'Aubreuil lay at her feet, motionless, blood pooling around her head. Dulcie stood in the doorway, her face pale, a fireplace poker in her trembling hand. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, kneeling beside Marthe. He checked her pulse, then shook his head. "She is dead." The room erupted in chaos. Jack fell to his knees beside Marthe, sobbing. Madame d'Aubreuil pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of horror as she saw her daughter's body. Giraud barked orders to secure the scene while Poirot examined the room with meticulous care. "What happened?" Hastings asked Dulcie, gently taking the poker from her hand. Her voice shook. "I heard Madame Renaud scream. I ran up and saw Marthe attacking her with a knife. I hit her with the poker to stop her. I didn't mean to." Poirot stood, his expression grave. "Mademoiselle Duvin, you have saved a life, but at a terrible cost. Marthe d'Aubreuil was the murderer of Paul Renaud." The revelation stunned the room into silence. Giraud scoffed, but Poirot ignored him, addressing Eloise. "Madame, please, tell us what happened." Eloise, supported by a servant, spoke haltingly. "Marthe came to my room, furious about the will. She accused me of betraying Jack, of ruining her future. She pulled a knife and lunged at me. If Dulcie hadn't come," Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the scene. "Marthe d'Aubreuil learned of your husband's plan to stage his death with the tramp's body. She saw an opportunity to secure Jack's inheritance by killing Renaud herself, then staging the tramp's murder to confuse the investigation. But when you announced Jack's disinheritance, her plan crumbled. In her rage, she sought to eliminate you." Madame d'Aubreuil, an anguished cry, collapsing beside her daughter's body. "Marthe, my child, why?" Poirot's voice softened, but his words were firm. "Madame, your daughter's love for Jack was consumed by greed. She killed to secure a future she believed was hers. But justice, it finds its way." Hastings felt a surge of emotion as he looked at Dulcie, whose eyes brimmed with tears. Without thinking, he took a hand, squeezing it gently. "You did what you had to do," he whispered. "You saved Madame Renaud." Dulcie nodded, her lips trembling. "I didn't want to hurt her. I couldn't let her kill Madame Renaud." Police arrived and Giraud took charge, though his earlier bravado seemed shaken. Poirot directed the officers to remove Marthe's body, his demeanor calm but authoritative. As the crowd dispersed, Madame d'Aubreuil vanished into the night, leaving behind only whispers of her past as Madame Beroldy. In the quiet aftermath, Poirot and Hastings returned to the drawing room, where Dulcie joined them. The weight of the day hung heavy in the air. Hastings, unable to contain his feelings, turned to Dulcie. "Miss Duvin," he said, his voice unsteady, "I know this is hardly the time, but I've grown rather fond of you. If you'd consider it, I'd like to call on you, perhaps in a less chaotic setting." Dulcie's eyes widened, then softened with a smile. "Captain Hastings, you're a brave man to ask such a thing now, but yes, I'd like that very much." Poirot cleared his throat, a rare twinkle in his eye. "Mon ami, you have chosen a fine moment for romance. But let us not forget the case is closed. Marthe d'Aubreuil's guilt is certain, and Madame d'Aubreuil's disappearance confirms her complicity, though she escapes justice for now." Hastings nodded, his heart full. "And what of Jack and Madame Renaud?" "They will heal," Poirot said. "The truth, though painful, brings clarity. They will start anew." Chapter 8. The wagers outcome. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of the Villa Genevieve, its rays filtering through the tall windows of the drawing room where Hercule Poirot stood, his hands clasped behind his back. His polished shoes gleamed as he paced slowly, his eyes darting with the precision of a metronome. Captain Arthur Hastings sat in a cushioned armchair, his fingers fidgeting with the brim of his hat, his mind still reeling from the chaotic events of the previous night. The air was thick with anticipation, for today was the day Poirot would confront Inspector Giraud and claim victory in their wager, a duel of wits that had consumed them both since the investigation began. The room was elegantly furnished, with heavy velvet curtains framing the windows and a crystal chandelier catching the light above. A mahogany table held a tray of coffee and pastries untouched by either man. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who seemed utterly composed, his mustache perfectly symmetrical, his suit immaculate, yet there was a glint in his green eyes, a spark that betrayed the storm of thought beneath his calm exterior. "Monsieur Poirot," Hastings ventured, breaking the silence, "are you certain this is the moment to confront Giraud? The case has only just concluded, and the tragedy of Marthe d'Albrul's death is still fresh." "Perhaps we should," Nan mon ami Poirot interrupted, raising a hand. His voice was firm but not unkind. "The time for hesitation is past. The truth, it is like a fine wine, it must be presented at the precise moment of its perfection. And today, that moment has arrived." Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. He had seen Poirot unravel mysteries before, but this case, Paul Renaud's murder, the second corpse, the web of blackmail and deception, had been a labyrinth of motives and misdirection. Even now, with Marthe d'Albrul dead and the truth seemingly uncovered, Hastings felt a lingering unease. Had they truly solved every piece of the puzzle? The door swung open, and Inspector Giraud strode in, his angular face set in a scowl. His dark overcoat was slightly rumpled, a stark contrast to Poirot's pristine appearance. Behind him trailed Monsieur Hotet, the examining magistrate, his round spectacles glinting as he adjusted them nervously. Two gendarmes flanked the doorway, their presence a formality after the violent confrontation at the villa the previous night. "Well, Monsieur Poirot," Giraud said, his tone dripping with condescension, "you've summoned us here with great fanfare. I hope this isn't another of your theatrical displays. The case is closed. Marthe d'Albrul killed Renaud, and the tramp then met her end in a fitting twist of fate. What more is there to say?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, one that Hastings recognized as a prelude to a devastating revelation. "Monsieur Giraud," Poirot began, his voice smooth as silk, "you are correct that the case is closed, but not for the reasons you believe. You have seen the surface, the footprints, the dagger, the obvious, but you have not seen the truth. Allow me, Hercule Poirot, to enlighten you." Giraud snorted, folding his arms. "Enlighten me? You've been chasing shadows while I followed the evidence. The girl's guilt is undeniable. She attacked Madame Renaud just as she stabbed her lover's father. Your little grey cells have led you astray this time." Poirot's smile did not waver. He gestured toward the chairs around the table. "Please, messieurs, sit. The story I am about to tell is not a short one, and it requires your full attention." Reluctantly, Giraud and Hotet took their seats, the latter pulling out a notebook to jot down details. Hastings remained where he was, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knew Poirot's methods well enough to sense that this was no mere summation, it was a performance. A meticulous dissection of the case that would leave no doubt as to who had won the wager. Poirot began, his voice steady and deliberate. "Let us return to the beginning, to the night Paul Renaud was murdered. A man of wealth, of secrets, found stabbed in the back and buried in a shallow grave on a golf course. A curious place for a grave, but this was no ordinary murder. This was a crime planned with care, yet executed with chaos." He paced slowly, his hands gesturing as if painting the scene. Paul Renaud, we now know, was not who he appeared to be. He was Georges Queneau, a man who, 22 years ago, conspired with his lover, Madame Baroldi, now Madame de Broglie, to murder her husband and escape justice. They succeeded, and Queneau vanished, reinventing himself as Renaud, a respectable millionaire. "But the past, it has a way of catching up, does it not?" Hotet nodded, scribbling furiously. Giraud's expression remained skeptical, but he leaned forward slightly. "Betraying his interest," Renaud, Poirot continued, "was being blackmailed by Madame d'Albrul, who recognized him as her former accomplice. To escape her demands, he devised a plan to stage his own death once more, using the body of a tramp who had died of an epileptic seizure. A clever ruse: dig a grave, place the body, disappear. But someone discovered his plan, someone who had their own reasons to want him dead." Giraud interrupted, his voice sharp. "And that someone was Marthe d'Albrul. She overheard Renaud's scheme, killed him to secure Jack's inheritance, and stabbed the tramp to muddy the waters. The evidence is clear. Her attack on Madame Renaud proves her violent nature." Poirot raised a finger, his eyes gleaming. "Ah, but that is where you err, Monsieur Giraud. The evidence, it lies. Marthe d'Albrul was indeed the killer, but not for the reasons you assume. Let us examine the facts, step by step, with order and method." He turned to the table, where a small pile of documents and objects had been arranged: a love letter, a photograph, a dagger, and a pipe, the latter belonging to Giraud himself. Poirot picked up the love letter, its edges worn from handling. "This letter, found in the overcoat on Renaud's body, was not addressed to Bella Duvin as you believed, but to Marthe d'Albrul. It was written by Jack Renaud, expressing his love and his desperation to secure their future together. Marthe, you see, was not merely a bystander. She was deeply in love with Jack, and she believed his inheritance was their ticket to a life together." Hastings shifted in his seat, recalling his own confusion over the letter. He had assumed it was tied to Bella, the spirited actress he had dubbed Cinderella. But Poirot's clarity was unshakable. "Marthe," Poirot went on, "overheard Renaud discussing his plan to fake his death. She knew that if he succeeded, Jack's inheritance would be delayed or lost entirely. for Renaud planned to disappear with his fortune, so she acted. On the night of the murder, she confronted Renaud after he had dug the grave on the golf course. In a moment of rage and desperation, she stabbed him with the dagger. Madame Renaud's dagger, which she had taken from the Villa Hotet, looked up from his notes. But why use the tramp's body? Why complicate the crime? Poirot's eyes twinkled. An excellent question. Monsieur Hotet. Marthe was clever, but not as clever as she believed. After killing Renaud, she realized the body would be discovered too soon, ruining her plan to secure Jack's inheritance. So she used the tramp, who had died naturally, to create confusion. She stabbed the tramp with the same dagger, mimicking Renaud's wound, and placed him in the grave. She hoped the police would assume the tramp was the intended victim, delaying the investigation until Jack could claim his fortune. Giraud's scowl deepened. And the overcoat? Why was Renaud wearing Jack's overcoat? A simple matter of opportunity, Poirot replied. Marthe took the overcoat from the villa to conceal Renaud's identity further. It was ill-fitting, yes, but it served its purpose to make the body appear as someone else at first glance. She placed the love letter in the pocket, perhaps to implicate Jack if her plan unraveled, ensuring she could manipulate him later. Hastings felt a chill. Marthe's cunning was chilling, yet Poirot's ability to unravel it was nothing short of miraculous. He glanced at Giraud, whose confidence seemed to waver. Now, Poirot said, picking up the photograph of Madame Dubois, let us consider the role of Madame Dubois. As Madame Baroldi, she was a master manipulator, and her influence over her daughter was profound. I believe she suspected Marthe's actions but chose to remain silent, hoping to protect her daughter and maintain her own hold over the Renaud fortune. When Marthe's attack on Madame Renaud failed, and she died in the struggle, Madame Dubois fled, knowing her past as Baroldi would soon be exposed. Chodet adjusted his spectacles. But Monsieur Poirot, how did you know Marthe was the killer? The evidence pointed to Jack, then to Bella Duvin. Poirot smiled, a touch of smugness in his expression. The evidence, it is like a canvas. Monsieur Hotet, one must step back to see the full picture. Jack Renaud had motive, yes, but his love for Marthe made him incapable of such a calculated act. Bella's confession was a noble lie to protect Jack, but it lacked consistency. The dagger, the timing, it did not fit. Only Marthe had the opportunity, the motive, and the ruthlessness to act. He turned to Giraud, his voice taking on a sharper edge. You, Monsieur Giraud, saw only the footprints, the physical clues, but the mind, the psychology of the killer, that is where the truth lies. Marthe's desperation for Jack's love and wealth drove her to murder, and her attempt to kill Madame Renaud was her final mistake. Giraud's face reddened, but he said nothing. Poirot picked up the pipe from the table, holding it out to the inspector. And now, Monsieur Giraud, I return your pipe, which you so kindly left at the crime scene. A small oversight, perhaps, but a reminder that even the most meticulous among us can The gesture was both gracious and pointed, a subtle jab at Giraud's overconfidence. The inspector took the pipe, his jaw tight, and muttered, You've made your point, Poirot. The wager is yours. Chodet clapped his hands, breaking the tension. Remarkable, Monsieur Poirot. Your methods are unorthodox, but the results speak for themselves. The case is resolved, and justice, though tragic, has been served. Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Justice, Monsieur Hotet, is not always served by the courts. Sometimes, it is the truth itself that brings closure. Hastings felt a swell of pride for his friend. Poirot's brilliance had once again triumphed, not through force or bluster, but through the relentless pursuit of truth. Yet his thoughts drifted to Dulcie Duvin, the vibrant woman who had captured his heart. Their engagement, born amidst the chaos of the case, was a bright spot in an otherwise dark affair. As the meeting adjourned, Hastings approached Poirot, who was adjusting his teppan with care. Poirot, you were magnificent. But what now? With Marthe dead and Madame de Boll gone, is the case truly over? Poirot's expression softened. For us, mon ami, it is over. Jack Renaud and his mother will rebuild their lives, free from the shadow of Georges Cannot's past. And you, he paused, a twinkle in his eye, you will sail to South America with Mademoiselle Dulcie. A new adventure awaiting. Hastings blushed, a smile spreading across his face. Yes, Dulcie and I leave next week. I confess, I'll miss these investigations, but I'm ready for what comes next. Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder. You have been a loyal friend, Hastings. Your heart, it is as valuable as my little grey cells. Go live your life, and perhaps one day, we shall solve another mystery together. The two men stepped out into the garden, where the air was crisp and the roses bloomed in defiance of the tragedy that had unfolded. The golf course loomed in the distance, its green expanse a silent witness to the crime. Hastings took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the case lift from his shoulders as they walked toward the villa's gate. Poirot glanced at the sky, where clouds drifted lazily. The world, Hastings, it is full of puzzles. But with order and method, there is no mystery too great for Hercule Poirot. And with that they parted ways, Poirot to his next challenge, and Hastings to a future filled with love and possibility. The wager was won, the truth revealed, and the Villa Genevieve stood quiet once more, its secrets laid bare under the watchful eyes of a Belgian detective. Chapter 9. The little grey cells at work. Hercule Poirot sat in the modest parlour of their temporary lodgings in Merlinville, her mare, his small, precise hands folded neatly over his waistcoat. The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished wooden floor. Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend and chronicler, lounged in an armchair opposite, a faint smile playing on his lips as he gazed out the window. The case of Paul Renaud's murder had been solved, the threads of deceit untangled, and yet Poirot seemed restless, his sharp eyes glinting with the fire of reflection. "It is a curious thing, mon ami," Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding. "Attention. How the mind, when properly ordered, can see what others overlook. The little grey cells, they are the true detectives, are they not?" Hastings turned his head, his expression a mix of amusement and admiration. "You've said that before, Poirot, and I dare say you'll say it again, but I confess, I'm still a bit foggy on how you pieced it all together. Marthe d'Aubreuil as the killer, it seems so improbable, yet it fits." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of satisfaction. "Improbable to those who do not think, Hastings. But to Hercule Poirot, the improbable is merely a challenge to the logical mind. Let us revisit the affair, step by step, so that you may see the method in my madness." He leaned forward, his hands gesturing with the precision of a conductor. "From the moment we arrived in Merlinville and learned of Monsieur Renaud's death, I knew this was no ordinary crime. A man stabbed in the back, buried in a shallow grave on a golf course, his body clad in his son's overcoat. This was a scene staged with care, yet riddled with contradictions. The overcoat, mon ami, was the first clue. Why would a man of wealth wear such an ill-fitting garment? It was not his. It belonged to Jack, his son. This suggested either a mistake or a deliberate attempt to mislead." Hastings nodded slowly. "I thought it odd myself, but I assumed it was a rush job by the killer." "Nan," Poirot waved a dismissive hand. "A rush job does not account for the love letter found in the Paquita letter, passionate, desperate, but vague. In its recipient, the police, led by that imbecile Giraud, assumed it pointed to a romantic scandal, perhaps involving Jack. But I, Poirot, saw it differently. The letter was not meant for Jack, nor was it written by him. It was a clue to the killer's motive, but we shall return to that." He paused, his eyes narrowing as he recalled the crime scene. The grave itself was another puzzle. Freshly dug, yet the body was not deeply buried. Why, if the killer wished to conceal the crime, why not bury Monsieur Renaud deeper? And Madame Renaud's story-bound and gagged by intruders who demanded her husband's secret smacked of theatricality. I began to suspect that Paul Renaud himself had orchestrated part of this drama. Hastings' brow furrowed. "You mean his plan to fake his death? But how did you know that so early?" Poirot smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "The little grey cells, Hastings. They do not sleep. Consider the facts. Renaud wrote to me, a detective of international repute, begging for help but revealing nothing specific. Why? Because he feared exposure, not of a present danger, but of a past one. His urgency suggested he was planning something drastic, a disappearance, perhaps. The shallow grave, the overcoat, the staged break-in all pointed to a man preparing to vanish, only to be betrayed by another's hand." Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. "So you think Renaud planned to use the tramp's body to fake his death?" Precisement, Poirot said, tapping his temple. "The tramp, poor soul, was the key. When we found his body, stabbed with the same dagger as Renaud, I knew he was no mere coincidence. The wounds were identical, yes, but the tramp's death was not a murder. He died of an epileptic seizure, as I deduced from the medical evidence. The stabbing was post-mortem, a clumsy attempt to link the two deaths. This told me the killer knew of Renaud's plan and used it to their advantage. But who?" Hastings asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "You suspected Madame d'Aubreuil early on, didn't you?" Poirot's expression grew solemn. Madame Madame Baroldi, as she once was, played a significant role, but not as the killer. Her past as the accomplice in the murder of Monsieur Baroldi 22 years ago was the shadow over this case. Paul Renaud, you see, was none other than Georges Queneau, her former lover, who fled justice after faking his death. When I traveled to Paris to investigate the Queneau case, I confirmed my suspicion. Madame d'Aubreuil was blackmailing Renaud, threatening to expose his identity unless he paid her. This was why he planned to stage his death again to escape her grasp. Hastings whistled softly. "Good Lord, Poirot, that's a devilish twist. But if she wasn't the killer, how did you zero in on Marthe?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with a thrill of the chase. "Marthe d'Aubreuil was the missing piece, mon ami. She was young, beautiful, ambitious, and in love with Jack Renaud. But her love was not pure. It was tainted by greed. When I learned that Renaud had changed his will, disinheriting Jack, I suspected Marthe had a motive. She stood to gain nothing if Jack was cut off. But how did she know of Renaud's plan to fake his death? That was the question." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. The answer lay in the villa. Marthe, living next door with her mother, had ample opportunity to overhear Renaud's plans. Perhaps she eavesdropped during a heated conversation. between Renaud and his wife, or perhaps Madame de Breuil in her blackmail. Let slip that Renaud was planning to disappear. Marthe, realizing Jack would lose his inheritance if Renaud vanished, decided to act. She followed him to the golf course that night, where he was preparing the grave for his staged death. In a moment of rage and opportunity, she stabbed him with the dagger, Madame Renaud's dagger, which she had taken from the villa. Hastings' eyes widened. And the tramp? Why kill him? To confuse the investigation, Poirot replied. Marthe was clever, but not as clever as Poirot. She knew the tramp's body would be found and assumed it would be mistaken for Renaud, buying her time. She stabbed the tramp after his natural death, hoping to create the illusion of a serial killer or a random attack, but she did not account for the little gray cells, the inconsistencies, the identical wounds, the shallow grave. The overcoat pointed to a single mind behind both crimes. Hastings shook his head, marveling. And the love letter? You said it was the key. Oui, Poirot said, his voice softening. The letter was written by Marthe, not to Jack, but to herself, a fantasy of her own making. She was obsessed with Jack, but also with the wealth he represented. When I realized the letter was not addressed to anyone specific, I saw it as a glimpse into her mind. It was not evidence of an affair, but of her desperation to secure Jack and his fortune. This was why I dismissed Bella Duvine's confession. Was protecting Jack, her lover, but the letter did not fit her story. Hastings chuckled. Poor Bella, I thought she was your Cinderella for a moment there, but it was Dulcie all along. Poirot's mustache quivered with amusement. Your romantic heart, Hastings, is both your strength and your weakness. Bella and Dulcie Duvin, twins, yet so different. Bella's confession was noble but misguided. Dulcie, your Cinderella, was the one who saved Madame Renaud from Martha's attack. Her courage and quick thinking exposed Martha's guilt. Hastings blushed slightly, his thoughts drifting to Dulcie. She's a remarkable woman, Poirot. I still can't believe she said yes to me. Poirot's eyes softened. You have chosen well, mon ami. Dulcie is a woman of spirit and heart. But let us return to the case, for there are details yet to clarify. He rose and began to pace, his small frame radiating energy. The wager with Giraud was, I admit, a touch of vanity, but it served a purpose. Giraud, with his magnifying glass and his footprints, represents the modern detective obsessed with physical clues, blind to the human soul. I, Poirot, looked to the mind, the motives, the psychology. Giraud saw Jack as the obvious suspect: inheritance, a quarrel with his father, the overcoat. But I saw deeper. Jack was a pawn, not a player. The true player was Marthe, manipulating events to secure her future. Hastings frowned. But what about Madame Dubreuil's disappearance? You let her slip away. Poirot sighed, a rare hint of frustration crossing his face. Hellos, that was a failure of circumstance, not method. Madame Dobreuil, or Madame Baroldi, is a woman of cunning. When Martha's guilt was exposed, she knew her blackmail scheme was finished. She fled, perhaps to another country, another identity. But she is no longer a threat to the Renauds. Her power was in Renaud's secret, and with his death, that secret is buried. Hastings leaned back, absorbing the explanation. So it all came down to Martha's greed and Renaud's past catching up with him. It's almost tragic. Oui, a tragedy of human flaws, Poirot said quietly. Renaud, as Georges Queneau, sought to escape his past, but it followed him. Marthe sought wealth and love, but her ambition destroyed her. And yet, from this tragedy, there is hope. Jack and Madame Renaud will rebuild, and you, mon ami, have found your Dulcie. Hastings grinned, his heart lightening. I suppose every case has its silver lining. Poirot stopped pacing and fixed Hastings with a piercing gaze. Every case, Hastings, is a lesson in the human condition. The little gray cells do not merely solve crimes, they illuminate the heart. This case, with its twists and shadows, was a test of order and method, and we have prevailed. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Hastings glanced at his friend, marveling at the mind that had unraveled such a complex web. You're a wonder, Poirot. I don't know how you do it. Poirot waved a hand modestly. It is not I, Hastings, but the method, order and logic. These are the tools of Hercule Poirot. Now, tell me, what are your plans with Mademoiselle Dulcie? Hastings' face lit up. We're sailing to Argentina next week. A fresh start, Poirot. I'll miss these adventures, but I'm ready for a new chapter. Poirot nodded, a touch of melancholy in his smile. And I shall miss you, mon cher ami. But life is a journey, and you must follow your path. I, too, shall return to London, where, no doubt, another mystery awaits. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows across the room. Hastings felt a pang of nostalgia, knowing this might be one of their last moments together in Merlinville. You'll write, won't you, Poirot? Keep me posted on your cases. May's been, sir, Poirot said warmly. And you, Hastings, must write of your adventures in South America. I expect tales of great romance and perhaps a little chaos after all. You are still you. Hastings laughed, the sound filling the room. I'll do my best to keep things orderly, for your sake. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Order and method, Hastings, always. As the evening deepened, they continued to talk. Poirot recounting smaller details of the case, the significance of the dagger's handle, the precise timing of Martha's attack, the subtle clues in Madame Renaud's demeanor that confirmed her innocence. Hastings listened, captivated, his mind half on the past and half on the future. The case of Paul Renaud's murder had been a labyrinth of deception, but Poirot's little grey cells had guided them through. By the time the clock struck 8, the parlor was bathed in twilight. Poirot rose, adjusting his waistcoat with characteristic precision. "Come, Hastings. Let us take a walk along the golf course. It is fitting now to bid farewell to the scene of our triumph." They stepped out into the cool evening air, the stars just beginning to emerge above Merlinville. The golf course stretched before them, its fairways silent, the shallow grave now a distant memory. Poirot walked with his usual brisk pace, his cane tapping lightly on the path. Hastings followed, his heart full, his mind replaying the whirlwind of the past days. "You know," Hastings said after a moment, "I never thought a golf course could be so sinister." Poirot chuckled. "Every place, mon ami, has its secrets. It is only a matter of seeing them clearly." They paused at the edge of the fairway, where Renaud's body had been found. The ground was smooth now, the grass undisturbed, as if the tragedy had never occurred. Poirot gazed out at the horizon, his expression serene. This case, Hastings, was a reminder that the past is never truly buried, but with order, with method, we can bring light to even the darkest corners. Hastings nodded, his thoughts drifting to Dulce, to Argentina, to the life ahead. "I'll miss this, Poirot. The puzzles, the chases, the way you always seem one step ahead." Poirot turned to him, his eyes warm. "And I shall miss your enthusiasm, your heart, your, how do you say, joie de vivre, but we part as friends, and that is enough." They stood in silence, the night closing in around them. The golf course, once a nightmare, was now a place of resolution, of closure. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, and Hastings' future beckoned. As they turned to walk back to the villa, the stars shone brightly above, a quiet testament to the order Poirot so cherished. The case was closed, but the story of Hercule Poirot would go on, as with the bond between two friends who had faced the darkness together and emerged into the light. Chapter 10. A farewell to Merlinville. Its sun hung low over the rolling greens of Merlinville, summer, casting a golden hue across the golf course that had been the stage for such grim events. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the fairway, his small, precise figure silhouetted against the fading light. His hands were clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as if listening to the whispers of the case that had just concluded. Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal companion, stood nearby, his suitcase packed and his heart heavy with the weight of departure. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the bittersweet tang of closure. "It is a fine evening, is it not, mon ami?" Poirot remarked, his voice soft but carrying that familiar note of precision. His green eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the horizon, though Hastings knew they were not truly seeing the landscape but rather revisiting the intricate puzzle of Paul Renaud's murder. "Fine, yes," Hastings replied, shifting his weight. His mind was elsewhere in Dulce, his newly betrothed, who waited at the station for their journey to Argentina. "Though I confess, Poirot, I'm not sure I'll ever look at a golf course the same way again." Poirot's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "The golf course, it is but a stage, Hastings. The drama, it is played by the hearts and minds of men and women. Here we have seen greed, love, betrayal, all the ingredients of a tragedy." Hastings nodded, his thoughts drifting to the whirlwind of the past weeks. The murder of Paul Renaud, the enigmatic millionaire who turned out to be Georges Cunning, a man who had once faked his death to escape justice, only to meet a real and violent end. The second corpse, the tramp, staged to confuse Marthe de Brul's desperate act of murder, driven by greed for Jacques Renaud's inheritance, and Madame de Brul, the shadowy figure from a 22-year-old crime, slipping away into the night. It had been a case of twists and turns, of secrets buried as shallowly as Renaud's body on this very golf course. "You solved it, though," Hastings said, a touch of admiration in his voice. "As always, Poirot. Your little grey cells never fail." Poirot waved a hand dismissively, though his eyes gleamed with quiet pride. "The little grey cells, they are but tools, Hastings. It is the understanding of human nature, the passions, the fears, the desires that unlocks the truth. This case, it was not about footprints or daggers, but about the heart, always the heart." They began to walk slowly along the path that wound through the golf course, the crunch of gravel underfoot punctuating the silence. Hastings glanced at Poirot, noting the detective's impeccable attire, the polished shoes, the perfectly knotted tie, the hat tilted just so. Even in the aftermath of such a case, Poirot remained a study in order and method. "Tell me, Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the quiet, "what was it about this case that struck you most? The audacity of Martha's plan, the cunning of Madame d'Aubreau?" Poirot paused, his gaze drifting to a distant bunker where Renaud's body had been found. "It was the deception, Hastings. The layers of it. Paul Renaud, or Georges Cunning, as he once was, thought he could outwit fate a second time. He planned to stage his death, to use the poor tramp's body as a decoy, to escape the blackmail of Madame du Breul. But fate, it is not so easily. Mocked someone Marthe saw through his plan and turned it against him. It is a reminder, mon ami, that one cannot run from one's past. Hastings frowned, his mind turning to the tragic figure of Marthe Dorr. She had been beautiful, vibrant, and utterly ruthless, driven by her desire to secure Jack Renaud's inheritance. Her attempt to kill Eloise Renaud had ended in her own death, a fall from the villa's balcony during a struggle with Dulcie, Hastings' beloved Cinderella. It was a grim end to a grim tale. And Madame du Breul, Hastings asked, "Do you think she'll ever be found?" Poirot shook his head. "Nan, I think not. She is a woman of cunning, Hastings. Like a shadow, she slips away. But she is powerless now. Her leverage over the Renaud family gone. Justice, it is not always a courtroom. Sometimes, it is the loss of power, the fading into obscurity." They reached a bench overlooking the ninth hole, and Poirot gestured for Hastings to sit. The detective remained standing, his hands still clasped behind him, his posture as erect as ever. Hastings sank onto the bench, his thoughts a jumble of the case and his impending departure. "I suppose this is it, then," Hastings said, his voice tinged with melancholy. "My last case with you, Poirot. Argentina awaits, and Dulcie." He trailed off, a smile tugging at his lips as he thought of her Dulcie du Vaughn, the spirited twin sister of Bella, who had captured his heart amidst the chaos of Merlinville. Expression softened, a rare glimpse of sentimentality breaking through his usual reserve. "You have chosen well, mon cher Hastings. Mademoiselle Dulcie, she is a woman of fire and courage. She will make you a fine wife, and Argentina, it will be a new adventure. But I confess, I shall miss your company." Hastings felt a lump rise in his throat. "And I yours, Poirot. You've taught me so much about deduction, about life. I'll never forget our time together." Poirot inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement. "You have been a good friend, Hastings. Your heart, it is large, and your loyalty is unwavering. These are qualities more valuable than all the clues in the world." For a moment, neither spoke. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The golf course stretched out before them, serene now, its secrets laid bare. Hastings thought of the first day they had arrived in Merlinville, the urgent summons from Paul Renaud, the cryptic letter that had set everything in motion. He thought of the train journey, of the young woman Dulcie, though he hadn't known it then, who had exclaimed "hell" at the window, sparking his curiosity. He thought of the crime scene, the shallow grave, the ill-fitting overcoat, and Poirot's unyielding determination to unravel the truth. "Tell me, Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence. "What will you do now? Back to London, I suppose." "Another case, waiting." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Always. There is another case, Hastings. The world, it is full of mysteries, and Hercule Poirot, he is never idle. But for now, I shall return to London, to my little apartment, to my tisanes and my books. And perhaps I shall reflect on this case, on the lessons it has taught." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Lessons for you, Poirot? I thought you knew it all." Poirot chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "Even Hercule Poirot learns, mon ami. This case, it has reminded me of the fragility of human plans. Paul Renaud thought he could control his fate. Marthe Dobrel thought she could secure her future through murder. Both were wrong. It is a lesson in humility, in the limits of our control." Hastings nodded, though his thoughts were already drifting to the future. He pictured Dulcie's smile, her quick wit, the life they would build together in Argentina. It was a new chapter, one he was eager to begin, yet the weight of leaving Poirot, of leaving this world of mystery and deduction, pressed heavily on him. As if sensing his friend's turmoil, Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. "A gift, Hastings," he said, holding it out. "For you, to remember our time together." Hastings took the box, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened it. Inside was a teapot delicately crafted in the shape of a golf club, its head encrusted with a tiny emerald that caught the dying light. "Poirot, it's splendid," Hastings said, his voice thick with emotion. "A memento," Poirot said simply. "Of Merlinville, of the golf course, of the case we solved together. Wear it, mon ami, and think of me when you do." "I think will," Hastings promised, slipping the teapot into his pocket. "Always." They stood in silence for a moment longer, the weight of their parting settling over them like the evening mist. Then Poirot straightened, his demeanor shifting back to its usual briskness. "Come, Hastings. The train. It will not wait, and Mademoiselle Dulcie, she will be impatient." They walked toward the station, the lights of Merlinville twinkling in the distance. The town had regained its quiet charm, the scandal of the murders already fading into gossip. At the station, Dulcie waited, her auburn hair catching the glow of the lamps. She waved as they approached, her smile bright and infectious. "Captain Hastings," she called, her voice teasing. "I was beginning to think you'd run off with another mystery." Hastings laughed, his heart lifting at the sight of her. "Not a chance, Dulcie. I'm done with mysteries, at least for now." Poirot raised an eyebrow but said nothing, his expression one of amused skepticism. Dulcie linked her arm through Hastings', her warmth a stark contrast to the cool evening air. "And you, Monsieur Poirot, Will you visit us in Argentina? I'm sure we could find a mystery or two for you. Poirot bowed slightly, his hat in hand. Mademoiselle, I am flattered, but I think Argentina, it is for you and Hastings. I shall remain here, in Europe, where the mysteries they find me. They exchanged a few more words, light banter masking the deeper emotions of farewell. Then, the train's whistles sounded sharp and insistent. Hastings turned to Poirot, his hand extended. Goodbye, Poirot. Thank you for everything. Poirot took his hand, his grip firm. Adieu, mon cher Hastings. Be happy. With that, Hastings boarded the train, Dulcie at his side. As the carriage pulled away, he looked out the window, watching Poirot's figure grow smaller, a solitary silhouette against the backdrop of mirth. The detective raised a hand in farewell, then turned and walked back toward the golf course, his steps measured and deliberate. As the train gathered speed, Hastings leaned back in his seat, Dulcie's hand resting lightly on his. He thought of the case, of the intricate web of lies and truths Poirot had unraveled. He thought of Marthe d'Abril, her desperate bid for wealth ending in her own death, of Madame d'Abril vanishing into the shadows, her power broken, of Jack and Eloise Renaud starting anew, free from the spectre of Georges Quenoux's past, and of Poirot always, Poirot with his little grey cells and his unshakable belief in order and method. The golf course faded from view, replaced by the rolling countryside, but Hastings knew it would stay with him, a symbol of the case that had changed his life. He touched the teapot in his pocket, a small weight that anchored him to the past even as he sped toward the future in Merlinville. Poirot stood alone on the golf course, the stars beginning to emerge in the velvet sky. He adjusted his hat, his eyes scanning the silent fairways. Order and method, always, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the rustle of the evening breeze. Then, with a final glance at the scene of his triumph, he turned and walked toward the town, ready for whatever mystery awaited him next. The night closed in, and Merlinville slept, its secrets laid bare, its story complete.